feel stupid, like, welcome to the CIP.
Yeah.
Are we being recorded?
Thank you for the snacks. Appreciate it.
I have my brownie first.
Life is short. Okay, we're going to begin the study session on the CIP. So we'll start with Interim City Manager Nicole Elmegard. You want to start us off?
Good evening, Council. We are pleased to present you with the draft capital improvement project plan for fiscal years 2018 through 2022. This is an extension and a dust-off of our existing plan. Staff is here this evening, both the Public Works Director, Mark Hurley, and our CIP Manager, Robert Gonzalez, to give you an overview of projects accomplished to date, explain what a CIP is, and talk about some projects coming up in the near future. We will also focus on the major ticket items that you see and touch every day, our streets, hopefully not our sewers, but you do understand the utility of those, as well as sidewalks and improvements. So without further ado, I want to make sure that we have enough time to get through council question and answers. That really is where the substance of the discussion will occur. So please welcome Robert and Mark.
All right. So Robert, I'm going to take the first part of the discussion, and then Robert's going to get into the details where we talk about CIP development. And then I'll come back and do some of the work on the highlights and key projects. In terms of like efficient use of time, my thought is let us get through the first two sections of this, my sort of introduction, and then Robert's sort of how the CIP was developed, and then we can get into some nitty-gritty on each of the projects. If you have a clarifying question or want some more information, we're happy to do that, but if we're going to get into the details of a project, let's wait to the latter part of the discussion. So, Robert, why don't you flip here? So one of the things is just getting some basic information and understanding what is a CIP and what do we use it for and what does it do. And for us, this is a plan that provides a roadmap of how we're going to execute our larger projects. And this we call larger projects really are any project that's greater than $25,000. We might have, I think we have one project in the list here that's below $25,000, but we included in the CIP just because it was a high visibility project and that and we wanted to track it that way. But generally speaking, these are projects greater than $25,000. And the plan also is a mix of priorities. We have some of the things in here we're required to do, and these are things like the sewer upgrade work tied to the consent decree or storm drain work or some of the other things that we have to do. Some of these things are commitments that we've made in various plans and other documents where we've committed to projects. And then it reflects our values of maintaining our infrastructure, building parks, and making investments into the city. A lot of the detail that's included in the CIP, it represents sort of our best understanding of the projects, including the scope, the schedule, the funding source, and how we're going to execute it. And then this really rolls into a planning tool to make sure that we have both the sufficient financial resources to do what we want to do, but then also look at the human resources to execute the project. And I think that's something we want to focus on this update of the CIP. We realize we have a fairly significant backlog of projects to do. And my reading of this is, in the first run of the project, we had a number of signature things, the Public Works building, a couple of parks, the undergrounding projects. My hope is this is going to be more nuts and bolts and focus on execution and buy down the backlog of some of the more mundane projects.
Yeah, you mentioned human resources. Is that in relation to how much we can do with our staff Is that what you mean by human
Yes.
resources? Okay.
Yeah, so one of the things, and you'll see it here on the last plan, it was a $31.2 million plan. We had 14 million of that in the first year. That was overly aggressive for the staffing that we have. So I think one of the things we want to do is make it more consistent throughout the plan. And that's why we want to focus on execution of projects. So we looked at, so we're trying to roll out a couple new concepts in how we execute the project. And one of the roles is a project sponsor. So we look at the project sponsor and the project manager are really the two key people in executing a project, where the sponsor is responsible for the what are we doing and the why are we doing it. So in a lot of cases, this would be the director of the home department or the person who's representing the project at a commission meeting. The project manager, on the flip side, is very narrowly focused on the execution of the details. Okay, we've settled on the scope, we know the budget, we know the schedule, and just working through the details and making sure that we keep on track and getting clear project documents so we can execute the project with a higher level of certainty. And then another thing we've started, and we've done this once on a project so far, is to establish a project team. And this would be cross-disciplinary across the entire city. So we'd reach out to fire department, the police department, and say, we're going to be doing a street improvement project. Here's the scope. Are you interested in it? And if so, who's your person who's going to be attached to the project so that they're responsible for attending the meetings, understanding what the project is, and providing the comments throughout the course of the project, so there's no surprises as we get through the, as we march through the planning and into design. Because I think one of the things that I've seen is we've run into a number of hiccups where we charge down a project and we get to the end and then we have to redo things because we didn't connect in with somebody. So we wanted to head that off at the beginning. And then we want to make sure we have a solid construction management plan for the projects, because once we get into that phase of the project, it becomes very detail-oriented, not so much understanding the scope or the high-level vision for the project, but the details that the contractor's responsible for delivering. Is it if the plan says it's supposed to be blue, make sure it's blue. Those types of really nuts and bolts details. And then keeping the contractor on plan. So making sure that we have a clear understanding of all those roles throughout the project. And then we have the CIP manager will be a project manager on a number of projects, but then will also sit over the entire CIP and monitor scope, schedule, and budget, and hopefully be able to identify problems early, and then we can bring them up and get them resolved a little more quickly. So in the public works staff, we're largely the execution side of projects. So we wanted, and we've had a lot of changeover in the last year or so, and so we wanted to kind of lay out where we're at. So we have Robert Gonzalez, who we'll hear from in a moment. He's been with the city for 3 months, and he's done most of the heavy lifting around this, the CIP. So we're very happy to have him be able to come in and jump in so quickly and really get up to speed. It's really helpful. Then we have a number of project managers. We have Chris Ablaza. He's one of our new engineers, as well as Razu Engin. They've been with the city for about 8 months, and both of them stepped into relatively complex projects. Razu completed the Albany Masonic improvements underneath BART tracks, and that was although it wasn't as large as some of the other projects, it was a high-touch project because we didn't have a dedicated CM staff. So Razu did the day-to-day CM, so that took a lot of his time.
And Razu and Chris are both engineers?
They're both our engineers, correct. And then Chris, he came in as well, and they actually started the same day. He came in and took on the Marin Buchanan project and Pierce Street Park. He had a little more robust construction management support around him, so he's able to cover both those projects. And it's worked out well, but that's where the important part of not overtaxing our staff, when you're going to be managing a project in the field with the contractor, you're not going to be able to do a lot of other things. So it's recognizing that and compensating for how you're going to execute other projects. And both Chris and Razoo have other responsibilities that aren't CIP related. Chris is heading up all our consent decree reporting for sewer, and Razoo is handling all the permit work for our clean water permit. So, and we all handle encroachment permits. So there's a lot of duties that they're juggling. And then we also have Aleda, who's our sage of the Public Works Department, and she plays a dual role. She'll be a sponsor in some projects, and she'll be a project manager in some projects. And so she's also vital in executing our projects. And then we will need consultant support. We have a backlog of projects, so in the near term, we have a contract project manager that's helping us out on some things. I imagine that's going to continue until we buy down our backlog a little bit. And then through the execution of projects, we are going to use a construction manager. I think that works well when we have a contract construction manager who's specifically here to do one thing and doesn't get pulled off and doing other things. So I think having that model there and creating contracts and relationships with construction managers does work well. And then we'll likely have inspection services as well as design services. I'll switch. So this slide summarizes the prior CIP, and so it lines out the spending per year as well as the different categories we have identified in the CIP, and those are building facilities, community improvements, major equipment, parks, trails, creeks, sewer, storm drains, and then streets, bikeways, and pedestrians. And like I said before, this was an aggressive plan. It's $31.2 million, but $14 million being in the first year. So again, I think we're going to see in this current plan, we're smoothing that out a little bit more. But I think if you take a step back, the city really did an amazing job. I came in probably the last part of the second year, and I'm amazed at the variety and the scope and the complexity of the projects that were completed. And I think that's very impressive. The other thing we noticed in the project, or in the plan, of the $31.2 million, 7.6 was grant funding. So that's pretty impressive. That's about 25% of the projects were grant funded. And of the executed work, and we'll get into this a little bit, and the executed work was about $12.1 million. Of that, 6.4 was grants. So it kind of makes sense that the grants are sort of clustered in the near years because we have the grants, secured the grants, and are executing in the out years. We might have a planning grant, but the construction's unidentified in the out years. But again, that's more than half of the work we executed was grant funded, which is pretty impressive. Looking at the next slide, this is a breakdown of budgeted versus actual. And you can see that it was an aggressive plan, and we attempted to do a lot. We did a lot. One thing that's not showing up here that I think is important, that in the building facilities, we only show about $1 million, and this represents the city money into the Public Works building. This doesn't account for the $7 million that the OVRA is spending for the overall construction. So in terms of the scale of construction we added, there's another $6 million that's not reflected on this chart.
And that's going to be paid back over the years because of the leasing arrangement?
Correct.
So the money that's going to be paid back over the next several years, is any of that going to be included in the contemporary, or the upcoming CIP? Where does that money land?
So the lease payments are budgeted in our operating budget. So it's just essentially like our rent for the old building.
So if we had paid for the building under an older model, all of these costs would have been in the CIP, but because we're paying for them through this leasing arrangement, what's it called, build and,
Was it lease back, I think?
yeah, then some of the money actually appears in the operating budget instead.
Correct. So there's the lease payment, which I think is $30,000. It shows, per month, shows up in our operating budget over the life of the loan.
Without getting into too much detail, just to mention Prop 13 places a limitation on the incurrence of debt by the city. So really, some really smart bond lawyers, right after Prop 13 passed, came up with this lease purchase structure that is technically not considered debt. So that's where we talk about it being in the operating budget. It's a debt service payment, but we call it a lease payment, and that's why it's in the operating budget going forward.
Yeah, my concern is just that if we have two similar projects, depending on how they're designed and how the paperwork is done, could look different under the CIP, even though they're virtually the same project.
Right, and we have that same issue with the undergrounding project, where what we're showing here in the budgeted and actuals are the costs, what we've expended, and the budget for the city component, whereas the utility component, which is another $3.8 million, is sort of a pass-through. And I think that's, in some ways, it could be handled like a grant, but the way we set it up initially, it's a pass-through, so it's not even really showing up significantly here.
Okay. Thanks, David.
So again, I think so hopefully when we sit here 2 years from now, these lines will be more closely aligned. That's our goal. Again, just running down the scope of the projects we did. We have some really high-profile projects. We have the maintenance center down below. Then we have this is the Albany improvements, and then we have some other projects that maybe aren't as sexy, like the enterprise software upgrade. I know everyone's very happy about that. So it's a whole hodgepodge of projects that we're doing that hit really all aspects of the project, where we're buying equipment, we're upgrading parks, and this is just the list. In the next slide, we have some more lists and pictures of the projects that we've done. And again, I think it's pretty impressive with the amount of staff we have and actually factoring in the turnover as well. So I'd like to hand this off to Robert now, who will take us through the development of the CIP.
Thank you, Mark. So in terms of developing the CIP, I've been here 3 months. I really jumped right in and started developing it immediately. We included all the department heads, so we kind of put together a game plan, brought all the departments into a meeting. We reviewed the prior CIP. We wanted to kind of evaluate where we were, kind of take a snapshot of progress to date, and then lay out a schedule of how we wanted to get to today. And ultimately, in March, we're going to bring this back to you as a final product for you to take action on. So this is really a conversation. This is our opportunity as staff to really listen to what your priorities are and listen to what your interests are in terms of putting future projects into the CIP. But this really is a great planning tool for staff. Nicole and Mark have already started doing this, but when you're reading a staff report, a lot of the language is going to be built around the CIP. We're going to reference the CIP, or we're going to tell you if it was included in the CIP, if it's on budget with the CIP, if it needs additional allocation or appropriation based on, new information. So all of those things are tools for us to use for the next 5 years. Part of what we did is during the meetings, we had all of the departments coming together. If I didn't get feedback from the departments, I went to the departments, police and fire get special treatment because I need their input, but they're not always, they're busy. So we did that, and then we also set up a SharePoint site to make sure that all of the documents were in one key location, so everyone can access them whenever they needed to. Part of the work is me understanding the budgets that were adopted previously and updating those where it was appropriate. A lot of it was me understanding what schedules were promised 2 years ago and what the realities are today and updating those. And then simply understanding from all of the departments what the new projects were. what the scope of the new projects were, what the hope is from the council or commissions or staff in terms of implementing those, and what's realistic. So there was a lot of conversations back and forth with all the departments of what were the goals, what's needed for new projects, and how are those all kind of fit into the to the CIP, or how they will fit in. So let's look at this. So summary of the changes: new projects, we have about 1.3 million. Rescheduled projects, as Mark mentioned before, those graphs, those graphs, those bars by type don't really match up. So we brought a lot of the projects from 16 and 17 that were either not started or partially completed and brought them forward. So some of this is stuff that's already in the ground, but it's not quite complete. Escalation: if you don't do a project and it sits there for a while, then the budgets get stale. So we brought up about $43,000 in escalated costs to date. And then scope and cost revisions. Anytime we saw something that 2 years ago sounded like a good idea, but from today's point of view, we wanted to make some changes. So I'll run through all of these to make sure that you guys are clear about what has changed and what hasn't. Did you have any questions? Sorry, we're just wanted to make sure. So in terms of new projects, street lighting, we've got a lot here. In 2 years, city staff and community members and council members all come up with new ideas. So we need to reconcile some of these new projects with what's already in the CIP. So I'm going to bring this back to you guys during kind of this back and forth communication about what's critical to do immediately and what can be saved for later. Because all of these are important. All of these are things we want to do, but some of these simply don't have the funds to finish them. The Civic Center HVAC ideally would go underneath the Civic Center general obligation bonds, but those have been used extensively in the past, and we might not have room today for all of that. Same with the EV charging stations. One of those charging stations is proposed for this location, and that would appropriately go into the Civic Center general obligation bonds. Again, what's the best way to pay for that, and what's the best way to implement it? Street lighting is something that we've heard from you guys that I guess for some time we wanted to do. So once we do an evaluation, then we have to figure out where our deficits are and how we're going to pay for those. So that's a big conversation to have. We just want to make sure that we're open to all of the, I guess, choices that might come to. So you can read through all of these, but a lot of them are traffic, a lot of them are transportation, a lot of them are pedestrian oriented, which is great. But that also means there's a work for staff to go after some bonds and additional funding. These are some of the rescheduled projects. Senior Center renovation phase 2. You guys are going to see that I think later tonight in the regular session. Ocean View Park improvements, some of those were implemented, some of those had to be delayed. So we're going to finish those up soon. Albany Hill access, I think everybody wanted to get that moving forward, but there were other projects that needed to go before that. While it was waiting, the pedestrian bridges were added to that project, so that's another discussion about how that's going to be implemented and what the timing is. Key route path, that's something that's been on the books for a while, but we delayed it because we wanted to get Albany done first, and we wanted to get Pierce Street Park completed. So those are really in the ground and completed, and you're going to be seeing project completion soon for those. And Key route is another one that kind of just moves along once we get those finished up. Just a few more. Complete streets, Buchanan Bridge resurfacing, that's been one that's been sitting there for a while, and the traffic calming projects. So these are some projects that had some scope and cost changes since the last CIP. The Senior Center renovations, there were some things that dipped into the donations fund. So there were just some things that we wanted to use some of that funding to beautify the Senior Center. And so there was a little bit of cost changes for that. The police cycle storage has changed in some scope. There's some interest in maybe utilizing that location for something other than just police cycle storage. Ocean View Park improvements, that's been updated. Albany Hill access improvements, I mentioned that the pedestrian bridge are really kind of an element that was discussed before, but what really wasn't priced out in the scope statement 2 years ago. The watershed management plan, when I looked at that scope, it looked like it was deficient in some ways. I'm interested in doing some field work that would go on top of that. So a watershed management plan should really have a really good idea of what the capacity of the existing storm drain system is. So you can see evidence of overflows and issues when they come out on the street, but you don't know if that's simply a maintenance issue where you've got a clogged storm drain, or if it's an undercapacity, undersized facility. So that's really informed really by field work. You need to go out there and measure the storm, measure the flows, and understand what capacity you have and what capacity deficiencies you might be able to alleviate yourself of by designing something new. Rather than replacing in kind, you want to maybe upsize it a few inches.
Robert, can I stop you for just a minute?
Sure.
The Albany Hill Access Improvement Pedestrian Bridge, is that the bridge at the School for the Blind? Or is that?
So there's two. There's the Adams Street, which is the School for the Blind, and then there is, I'm blanking on the other name.
Belmont.
Belmont?
I think it's Belmont.
So Belmont is a city in El Cerrito that bridges over into the Albany Hill Park area.
Thank
So certainly. So this is the proposed CIP. We can go through these numbers one by one, but it's basically about $31 million. And I would just point out that streets and bikeways all the way down towards the bottom, that's roughly about half of our budget. So that's a large chunk of what we're doing is in terms of street rehabilitation, transit improvements, bikeways, all of those things fit into that big category. And then some of these things, as we mentioned before, we're obligated to do. Sewers and storm drains, we're going to do those. We're going to make sure that those happen in terms of priorities. So this is the same information but put together in kind of a bar chart format so we can see the CIP totals by category of what was adopted 2 years ago and what we're proposing today. Buildings and facilities go down because we're not building a new maintenance center. We're simply maintaining what we have. Community improvements are roughly about the same. Major equipment, we're going to be looking at a little bit more spending. Police and fire didn't really spend a lot reinvesting in equipment over the last 2 years. They've got more budgeted over the next 2 years and over the next 5 years. So you're going to see a little bit more in terms of attention being brought to council on those purchases. Parks and trails, we're going to continue investing in parks and trails. You're going to see Cerrito Creek in there. Sewers and storm drain, we overpromised about $12 million of projects in the prior CIP. We still think we need to do a significant amount of improvements, and some of that is reflected here. Part of that, I mentioned that we're going to do this watershed assessment. That's going to inform us of what we need to do for the next 5 years in terms of projects. So if this changes, it'll be as we get new information from the watershed master plan. Same thing with sewers. We did a sewer master plan a few years ago. If that becomes stale, if we need more information, or if we get a lot of further down that priority list, we do another update of that so that we can make sure that we're rehabilitating the sewers that we need to, that are most pressing.
Question?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's been several years now, but I don't remember when the GASB changes, it made public organizations to start booking the capital value of their buildings and then depreciating them. Is that ringing a bell? That was GASB. It was a big GASB change several years ago.
I didn't study up on the GASB change.
You'll see where the question's going. But.
So the GASB 34, which was implemented a few years ago, we don't get a choice. They just implement them on us. Basically required cities to start valuing their assets. By assets, it's streets, sewers, everything that we build now. We have to capitalize it and basically depreciate those assets going forward.
Okay, so here's my question about major equipment. Typically, there's some triggers, is either how long the major equipment lasts or how much it costs, where you either expense it or you treat it as an asset. Do we have triggers like that? for
We
the
do,
C-
and what you'll see in in about a month from now when we bring the audit forward, it has schedules for how we depreciate those assets. So the Public Works building might be a 50-year depreciation, 30 to 50 years depending on that. And equipment, generally, it's going to be somewhere between 5 to 10 years in terms of the depreciation and how we over the life of the asset, we should be accruing sufficient monies to replace that asset going forward.
Right, and is there some dollar limit? I get UC, it was something like if it's a computer below $1,000, it's expensed. If it's over $1,000, they put it on the inventory.
So there's two different, I look at it two different ways. One, there's a threshold above which you want to value it as a capital asset and put it on your fixed assets list. There may be a value below that that you want to still maintain inventory control on it. A good example would be firearms. Might not be over $5,000, but you probably want to keep track of those things. So there's an inventory control component that Mark and I are talking about, and that's with our enterprise software that allows us to do some of that.
Okay, thanks.
Let me just bring your attention to one of the graphs on your CIP. So you've all got your CIP in front of you. We added a couple more things since you saw it on Friday. Next to the tab where it says all expenses by category, you'll see a table with a pie chart. So that's a nice, simple.
Page are we on? I'm sorry.
So it's behind the tab that says all expenses by category
Third
summary.
tab in.
Okay, got it, thank you.
Thank you. I do.
That's- Yeah, that must be the extra. All yours.
Sorry about
Where you
that.
put the forks and the knives, the
Right.
right or the left. Here.
So everybody has one? So the third tab in, you've got the pie chart. So that's a nice reference. Just to give you a sense, I mentioned before that streets, bikeways, and pedestrian investments take up half of that pie chart. So that's a nice way to bring that up. I think I was finished with this graph, but the last bar chart there is the streets and bikeways. We've got even more projects there, and I think a lot of that is Aleda identifying additional projects and then communicating with the public about which ones they want to see move forward. So not all of these are going to be able to be implemented in the next year. Not all of them are going to be implemented in the next 2 years. So we want to make sure we're clear about which ones we want to do. And if we want to do more, it means we're going to be hiring more consultants, or we're going to be not doing other projects. So right now, Mark mentioned some of our engineers. We have 2 engineers and myself. So if we've got engineers dedicated to sewer and to street and to traffic and pedestrian and to storm and to sidewalks, if we want to add additional projects to that, we have to kind of make a value judgment about what doesn't get done.
Okay, sorry, one more question.
Certainly.
Your last bar on the right, the big one, streets, and that includes maintaining or improving our pavement quality index, which has an acronym which I can never
PCI.
remember. PCI. And what's
Yes,
that an acronym for?
Pavement Condition Index.
Condition. Okay, thank you.
So it does. Do you want to?
This is a great segue into the next
is.
slide. So the next series of slides are just sort of the high-level projects, and so if you guys want to dive into the details and questions, just this is the time. So I highlighted 3 of them that I think are worth a separate discussion, and then we can kind of open it up to everyone. So paving, looking at the project sheet, we have $11.6 million programmed throughout the entire 5-year time horizon. It's a mix of funding. One of the things that we added this year was the funding for SB1, so that's something that wasn't in the prior plan. Looking at sort of the distribution, we are front-loaded in the first 2 years, and this represents, we haven't done much in the last year or so, so we've rolled those monies forward, and they're sitting in the first couple of years. So we have a lot of work on our plate in paving over the next couple of years. And then once we get the next couple of years out of the way, then we're at a more consistent $1.2 million of spending per year. and that's what we're projecting to be sort of on out. I want to touch on some of the things we're doing right now. One of the things, and this was, I think we brought it to council in June, was to engage a consultant and really plan out the pavement portion of the CIP. And the things that we're interested in are making sure that we're coordinated with other work, particularly our sewer work. And we just learned of, probably in the last, 2 months, we learned of 15,000 linear feet of water line that East Bay Mud's going to upgrade within I think 2 or 3 years. Our storm drain work, and we want to make sure when we pave streets that they stay paved and not dug through for the long term, because they're investments that need to be long term. So our intention is to come back later this year, likely summertime period, because just the sheer amount of work we have to come and really plan out the CIP. And the couple things that we were, at least I was concerned about before the SB1 money was laid in, is at the out years, I'm concerned that we don't have enough money to maintain the gains in pavement condition that we would get by investing the money that we have right now. So that's something we need to be aware of. As well as if we use the Street Saver program, there's a classification of streets that just don't prioritize highly on in the program. And these are residential streets that drop below a certain level because they're very expensive to redo. And so when we get our arms around what the collection of streets are, I think we need to have a conversation of how we tackle those, because I think we want to, at a minimum, be spending enough to make sure we keep the gains that we're going to be making or getting through investing this $8 million. But we need a way to tackle these other streets.
Yes, sorry, I think I followed what you're saying, so let me just repeat, make sure I understand that you have to do the calculation of when it makes sense to spend the street paving money in order for the streets not to deteriorate and cause you to spend more money later on.
Correct. So the way the Street Saver program works, it tries to match up the pavement condition with a number of treatments. And if you invest in streets that are good, you keep the streets at a higher level at a lower cost. If you spend your money on all the bad streets, well, then you're going to have a case where, let's say you upgrade one bad street to a high level, but then 2 more drop into the lower level. You end up not being efficient, and actually your streets that are poor continue to grow even though you're investing in it. So once we get our arms around that, we really need to have that conversation and make sure that we're investing enough to keep the good streets good, but then also have a plan to deal with the streets that don't rate high.
It's a triage problem, really.
Exactly.
No, I'm sorry, SB1, that's the governor's gas tax proposal?
Correct.
Now, they just got enough votes to put that on
I know,
ballot.
that's something that we need to factor into that as well.
So how much money were we depending on?
So we have, in the first year, we had $106,000. And then over time, and then the next year, so there were a number of things that kick in, and the gas tax was the first one, and it was $106,000 for the first allocation. And then we're looking at about, our projections show we'd get about $320,000 in the out years. So that's an important thing to keep our eye on in terms of risks.
And I think as we're moving forward and spending some of that money, that we really need to publicize where that money came from, especially in the next year, and really push that is the SB1 money. And
Right.
it's important that we keep it.
Right, exactly. And then, so even though we haven't completed our planning analysis, we don't want to let this construction season go by without doing anything. So we have 2 things queued up. We have Evelyn that we're going to pave, and this was, if you remember back in October when we talked about the report we had to submit for SB1, we got approval to pave Evelyn between Portland and Garfield, and that's one of those classic streets that doesn't rate high at all, and it's a residential street, so it's never going to get prioritized. So we thought this was a nice project, so we're going to do that project. We also have identified a project that's focused around Albany Hill, let's call it Pierce Street, north to San Pablo, on the south side of Albany Hill, where we've done most of the sewer work in that area. We've done some paving, but there's some gaps in the upgrade. So we're gonna pave that area and also complete the ATP.
For Solano, oh, sorry.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
For Solano Avenue, we're waiting for an EBMUD project? Is that?
There is a pipeline that's going to be replaced in Solano. Yes, and I can't remember the limits. Is it on the lower part of Solano?
It is the lower part of Solano. It's from San Pablo to Key Route. So it is our favorite part of Solano.
Yeah.
It'll take a lot, and this is about 2 years out for East Bay Mud, and we've made it clear to them at the outset that this needs a lot of outreach, it needs a lot of hand-holding, it needs a lot of planning to make sure that it goes well. East Bay Mud is reasonably good at doing this because they're familiar with multiple communities, and their pipelines are everywhere. So they should have the skills to reach out and be communicative, but we want to make sure that we're not forgotten in their planning process. If I remember correctly, they were planning this for either 2019 or 2020. And we'll be talking to them regularly because before they get to Solano, they're going to be doing some residential streets kind of in the Berkeley, Albany border. They're going to be moving up from there.
Is this something that'll get done sort of a block at a time on Solano so people can park reasonably close to their favorite retail stores while this is going on?
Yes, and that's how we'll be communicating with them. And if we need to make it shorter than a block, we can make it shorter than a block. Some of like Tevlin is a good example of a residential street that has a very long block. And closing off an entire reach of Tevlin may not be reasonable. But there's a pipeline in Teflon that they want to replace. So we may be working with them about sectioning a couple 100 feet off at a time where there's no traffic, no through traffic. I'm not sure if I'm getting into too much detail here.
Well, I guess one of the things they've formally submitted encroachment permit application. So as part of our review and issuance of encroachment permits, we can include details in terms of limiting how much street they can, how much parking they can disrupt, where they do storage and staging and things of that sort. So I think we have some flexibility to do that. And we have our ace in the hole. Robert used to work for East Bay Mud, so he can work the angles.
Connections.
Is the Buchanan overpass bridge part of these numbers?
Not in this. It's a separate standalone project. This is the resurfacing of the overpass?
Okay. Yeah.
Yes. And then the last thing we have, so East Bay Mud's going to be doing some paving work, and we've already started talking to them about, when they do their pavement restoration, we might be able to add on and potentially leverage what they're doing, and either they do a little bit more or whatever. So we want to remain flexible on that.
The Buchanan Bridge resurfacing is project 24003. So if you look in your binders under streets, the first one is 2100, which was the one that Mark has been referring to. And if you flip forward a few pages, 24003 is specifically called out for the budget for the Buchanan Bridge resurfacing.
Okay, so definitely separate.
Okay.
Sidewalks. So we have, through the life of the project, about $1.4 million of funding, which is significant. That's amazing. Again, it's a mix of funding. In the early years, it's a mix of our general capital, and then in the out years, it's primarily the sidewalk tax. Currently, we have about $750,000 of funding in our current year in FY19, and then we drop down to the $210,000 per year in the out years, and that's fairly consistent through the end of the sidewalk program. So we have a big backlog to do, and I know everyone's anxious to get the sidewalks done. Here's where we are. We got the criteria approved by Traffic and Safety in October. We've prioritized the list. The list is now going to Traffic and Safety this week for approval, and that'll allow it. We're going to finish up our designs, and the idea is to come back to council here March-ish to go out to get approval to go out to bid. We've looked at breaking these up into $100,000 contracts, and just because we want to be able to manage it. Razu's is managing this program, and it's a high-touch program where there's a lot of resident outreach, and I imagine it's going to be that way with the contractor as well. But once we get this contract up and running, we want to start designing and getting the next piece going and the next piece going, so that it becomes more of a cycle. So things are just, you get one out and we start working on the next one. We get one out, we start working on the next one. Go ahead.
I just think, given some comments from my neighbors about, and I think there's at least one big gap on my block that's on one of these lists, that we communicate in some way, or at least the council has available information on what sidewalks are getting fixed where in town, so we can say to our neighbors are saying, what are you doing with that parcel tax money? And we can say, oh, go over on that street, blah, 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 and look at that. And that's where we're at now.
That's a fair comment. And one of the things we've wanted to do is everyone who's on the list, once we prioritize this and get this set, send them a letter to know where they're on the list and give them an indication of when we think they're going to get their sidewalk fixed. Let's see. We're also doing a couple of things. I think one of the comments that we got when we developed the criteria and our discussion is that we didn't want this to be a squeaky wheel list where it's just driven by people who call in and complain. So we are actively surveying where there's issues out there to get a more holistic list, and we're using a couple things. One, we had an intern that's gone out and done some surveys. We're also looking at a contractor who was surprising how cost efficient it is to come out and do a survey of various streets, and then they will give us a file that can be integrated into our GIS system, which is just going to be a much, much easier way to manage it. So we want to get this out. We want to get it rolling, getting the $100,000 contracts out there. And once we get one, we might adjust and say, hey, we can do a bigger contract, or we might want to ratchet it down to a smaller contract. We'll make those decisions as we go forward. But then we're also building a more robust list that's not just the squeaky wheel list. And the last key project I had was sewer. And so if you look at, so I'm showing that we have about $9.8 million across the 5-year plan. And if you look at your project sheet, it doesn't say 9.8. So one of the things that did not make it into this CIP, this version of the CIP, was at the last council meeting, we closed out the 2015 project, and there was unspent money in the 15, 16 years, and we rolled that forward. Those changes didn't get worked through this program. So the $9.8 million here is correct, and it'll be updated in the final CIP and showing the correct numbers. That's one of the things we're going to do. Once we settle it, we're going to scrub all the numbers and make sure everything is tied correctly. Again, it's not sidewalk tax, and it's not a mix of funding, but it's primarily coming from the sewer capital. We have $6.4 million in our current year, and then after that, we're at $1.1 million. All of the work here is dictated by the consent decree, and just to be clear about it, we're about a year behind in that. We've been very upfront of that in our reporting, and we have designs to get us back on track. One of the things we did last year was design a pretty large project. We think it's about a $3.8 or $3.4 million project, and that's about 90% designed. That plus the key route work that was pulled from the other contract that we're going out to bid, we're going to redo the design and go out to bid, should get us back on track. And then and this is where we're going to use our consultant to primarily manage the key route piece and this large project, and that'll leave Chris to start designing the next project after that. And our hope is to get back on track with the reporting requirement.
Are there any consequences for us to be a year behind?
So we've talked to our regulators and about it, the people we submit the report to, and they said as long as you're showing your plan. I think the big thing, and I think it's 2021, we have our first check-in with EPA. So my point is, I want to be back on track by that point. So so this is, in my mind, this is our key focus in getting this thing back on track.
What's the, excuse me, approximate deadline for us being done and out from under the consent decree? 5 years, 10 years?
No, it goes out to like 2035.
Oh, well,
It's a,
at this rate, there might not be an EPA by then, but I'm glad to see they're still continuing to work on their old projects.
And I think part of that is that consent decrees are negotiated by multiple parties, and cities like Oakland or cities like Berkeley, who are large and they have a large amount of infrastructure, they need 20 years to fall in line with a consent decree. So in some ways, we can get ahead of that curve.
so that's what I had just for the key projects that I know everyone was interested in. So I'll turn it to Robert to.
Yeah, so let's talk about some of the new projects. These are the big categories: pedestrian improvements, traffic calming, EV stations, and street lighting. Some of the other projects that aren't on this slide but are already planned: San Pablo Buchanan, the streetscape project for San Pablo, the Complete Streets project. We've got rectangular rapid pedestrian beacons. I think we also had, 1 second here, the police cycle storage, which is an existing project, but we have new scope on that. Over the weekend, we were reminded that cycle track should be, make sure that we include the cycle track, the gap from Marin to the UC Village, to include that in there. And then the Marin Masonic intersections, the signal improvements for Marin Masonic and San Pablo Masonic. Is that right?
Solano.
Solano and Masonic. So all of those have been communicated back to us as priorities. We want to make sure we reflect those priorities in the document, but at the same time, there are resource constraints, and we're not going to be able to get to all of that in the first couple of years. So this is an opportunity for you guys to circle back with us and kind of give us an idea of if something were to slip, or if something were to be planned to move out to, say, 2020, we can certainly consider those things.
Actually, Robert, I want to jump in on.
Sure.
We also have a new project that's sort of a blend between a new discrete project and an annual project. This is the traffic calming citywide. So this grew out of sort of understanding our backlog of commitments that we've made to traffic and safety. So when residents come in and want a speed hump and things of that sort, Aleda does her analysis, they make a recommendation to traffic and safety, but in a lot of cases we run into something where there's not dedicated funding to go out and execute the work. So what this project is doing is trying to do two things. I think in the first year we have 200,000.
I can double check. It's right here.
On the order of no, it's not that much. We have a certain amount of money in the first year to buy down the backlog of commitments, and I was surprised some of these date back several years.
200,000.
That's 200,000. Okay, 200,000 in the first year to buy down this backlog. But then we have programmatic money each year, and we've set it at a nominal $40,000 a year, and that's based on it. It just seemed like the right number, and if it's more, well, we can come back to you and ask for more, and if it's less, we have more to distribute to other things. But I just wanted to highlight that's one of the things we're focusing on. We want to buy down our commitments and then make programmatic money available, so we don't get into this situation again.
So is it your hope that we look at these and kind of prioritize them tonight?
Well, my hope was that, in general, we can come up with some criteria, like if we knew something was safety related, we can bring that up to the top and make sure that that gets done. So in terms of traffic calming citywide, there may have been things that are more pressing, Masonic and Solano, the Masonic intersections may be something that is pedestrian safety related. Some of the other projects, like maybe closing the gap with the cycle track, it's nice to have, but maybe it's not directly related to pedestrian safety. So maybe having more of that conversation, and between now and maybe the first part of February, getting some feedback from council, or maybe today is just for questions.
Well, could you say more about the first bullet, pedestrian improvements? What falls under that?
Yeah, I think a lot of things fall under that, and let's see. So the ones that were brought up over the weekend were the intersections, Masonic and the two intersections on Masonic and Solano, and Masonic and Marin. Pedestrian beacons. In I believe there were 3 locations for pedestrian beacons that we were going to evaluate and see if they kind of raised to the top. So initially, that might not be a large cost. Once we realize that we do need them, then we have to go out and search out for money. The initial effort is a lot of staff time, just kind of evaluating where pedestrian beacons might be needed. Cycle track, again, that's another one that has a cycle improvement. It's not necessarily pedestrian, but it's non-motorized. So that might fall into that category because it's going to be something that we're going to ask Aleda to implement.
Well, I think this goes with pedestrian improvement is the street lighting. I think it's not very likely people are going to want to be walking around at night because our streetlights really need attention. And I would like to see us implement a master plan for streetlight improvement, replacement, I'm not sure what the right word is. And I'd like to see us move that to high priority. And I think it fits safety, I think it fits pedestrian improvement, I think it fits bicycle improvement. I think it goes across the board. So I'd like to see us add that in, developing the master plan and then figuring out how to go about implementing it as a high priority.
Yeah, and I think you said it well, that you don't want to just go and tackle a particular area where you've heard people complain about. You want to do a survey of the city so that we can make that master plan out of the survey. And that sounds like the right way to go on that one.
Right. So in terms of, we had a couple conversations with consultants to just make sure we understood the scope of what we were planning to do on this project. In our mind, it would look something like there'd be an initial task where they look at the city and look at the areas and then set up what would be appropriate criteria for different areas. Then we would go out and do some level of surveying, whether it's, and this is where the cost issue gets into place. You can survey the whole city, or you can survey representative streets that reflect the lighting level in certain areas and make sure you have enough of these to be representative of the entire city. Another way to do it is identify areas where we think are well lit, and areas that are not well lit, go out and survey those and see how they compare to the criteria, and then use that as a basis for projecting cost for that classification or type of street. So that would be our approach to that. So.
Yeah, it sounds like being efficient is the right way to go. You might not want to survey the entire city because you might know that for all the residential streets,
Correct.
there's 2 streetlights per, and
it just
you're
is-
not going to learn much more
Exactly.
about that. But Solano and San Pablo especially, and maybe Marin and Buchanan,
Correct.
you'd want to know.
Correct. And that's our approach. And right now we have that in 2020. And some of the logic on that was, we know we have the Solano Avenue project that's going that would help hopefully inform a primary corridor. One of the things, and so that was our logic of putting it in the 2020 bucket. Really moving it to 2019 would be the only other option, but we would have to look at something, maybe trading another project.
Could you refresh my memory? When you say 2019, is that starting July of 2019?
Yeah, so that's, this is one of the other real confusing things other people, so these are fiscal years, so this starts in July. And in some of the staff reports we've tried to use for 2018, it's FY 17/18, so everyone's clear, it's July to June.
Right. So if you say the 2019, you mean the 1920?
18-19.
Okay, so it's the ending year.
It's the ending year.
Ending year.
So anything that's 19 begins in July
Yes,
of 18.
yes.
So hang on, let's get clear. Fiscal year dates take the year of the calendar year in which they end.
In which they
Correct.
end, that's
In which they
correct.
end, yes, that's it.
Yes. So we are in 2018, and we are also in FY 2018 today. In December, we were still in FY 2018.
Yeah. Explain to me, let's say we do a nice master plan, improve street lighting, and there, we have some kind of agreement where the county changes the bulbs, and there's some joint, is that going to be a problem? How's that?
So that would have to be, so we have a contract with the county for maintenance. I don't know the details of that off the top of my head, but obviously if we do large upgrades where we're either adding new lights or drastically changing lights, that agreement would have to be upgraded.
Okay, and one more quick question. I'm assuming with all the advancements in LED lighting that it's much more energy efficient to do bright street lighting now than it used to be, but I'm recalling maybe 3-4 years ago we had some lighting improvements under one of our LLADs, and people complained because they didn't like the color of the lights.
Yeah, I think that was a big challenge. I know on my street when they came in, redid the changed out to LEDs. The first run, the LEDs were just focused down, and so I think you have an issue if you just change out the fixture and keep the location the same. Sort of the throw is different, and so that creates dark spots. Then you get the other flip side is then they go put on a light on every pole and everything, and then it looks like stadium lighting, and it's super bright white. I think there's been some improvements in terms of the quality of lighting and softness and things. But I'm not a lighting expert, but I've exhausted my knowledge there.
So who would do the survey for lighting? Would that be a lighting expert of some sort?
Yes.
And are there some best standards that are now exist? And what cities are meeting them, what cities aren't meeting them? You know, my sense is that we replaced all our bulbs with these LED lights as a way of saving energy, and
Correct.
I'm sure it saved enormous amounts of energy. But you know, the other side of that is we don't have the light that we used to have, and they're not as good. You know, cities need light. So, you know, I'm very much with the mayor on this one. I think I've long thought that our lighting just isn't quite adequate, and not just on the big streets, Solano and Marin and Buchanan, but in some of the residential neighborhoods, it just doesn't seem bright enough. And you know, just one last little story. I live close enough to the Berkeley border that when I walk the dog at night and go into Berkeley, they added just a few more LED lights to each one of their poles, and it makes a huge difference. So,
Right.
you know, how big a deal this is, to change, I don't know.
I will say in my block, you know, there's a combination when you have bad sidewalks and bad lighting at night. People walk down the middle of my street at night because it's dangerous walking on the sidewalks. But we just have this custom. Everyone turns their porch light on and leaves it on all night long because otherwise it's just too dangerous because it's so dark.
I think it's pretty clear we're moving that up to 2019.
Yeah.
Could I just, in your CIP, in your folders, there's a tab that's called All Projects Listed by Category Summary. It should be right after that pie chart that I pointed out later on. This is a 2-page table that's quite useful to look at projects by category. You want me to read that again? It should be the fourth tab, all projects listed by category summary.
Wait.
And I'll put in a plug for the EV charging stations. From what I understand, it's a smaller project, and we went out for grant money for it. And it's one of those things where I don't want to see us falling behind. I mean, we're already behind. We're the only city that I know of that doesn't have any muni charging stations. So, there's a big push from the state to electrify cars, and we've got. The Bay Area's got a ton of plug-in vehicles, so I don't see any reason to wait on that one.
So we're not waiting on that one. And
Okay.
that project is likely going to come to council February, the second meeting, I believe. And it includes, so we got a grant to do a certain number of those, but the project also includes a second charging station at the Public Works Center. So when we built the Public Works Center, one of the things, and Gail, our maintenance manager, was a spearheaded on this. He looked at the plans, and as they were building the foundation, he put conduit running in the foundation from the electrical room out to the back of the building and as well as the front of the building. So we're set up to do charging stations. So we're going to do the one in the front side of the building that is part of the grant, and then we're also including sufficient budget to do the one on the backside.
I've wondered, is there any possibility, and we talk a lot about grant money funding this, but those charging stations often strike me as another opportunity for advertising, like our our trash collectors have space on them, and anything like that, at least in the process of looking at this, could be explored and have some little revenue stream.
So there's two parts of this, and I think they're both going to come to council. There's one part that's really the public works side of thing, that's the nuts and bolts of constructing things. Then there's the other side, as we're constructing it, I think there's going to be a conversation of exactly what you're touching on in terms of what rates do we want to charge? Are we, and how does all that work? And it can get pretty complicated of how you want to structure it.
I just want to say that it's almost 7:10, and I have more to say, and I'm sure
Okay.
everybody else does. So I think we need to kind of raise this discussion up a little
Okay.
higher level and
Sure.
not get too far out in the weeds. Having said that, the rectangular rapid pedestrian beacons, I know they're on there. I think there's something that that I would like to see us move forward, especially as, we're working through this issue about crossing guards, and that's one of the things that's come up. And so I think that if we could move those forward, that would be good. And I'll just finish and then give everybody else a chance. I think the police cycle needs to get done. I know they've been waiting a long time. I'm not sure what's happening with it, but it doesn't seem like it's that big a project. It'd be good to have their vehicles out of the weather, so we're not spending money replacing and repairing vehicles. So I think that should move up. And personally, I have a lot of concern about the Marin and Solano and Masonic intersections. As I'm driving there, I see a lot of issues, and I think that needs to get rectified sooner rather than later. With that, everybody else jump in.
I agree with all of those.
Okay.
On the street rehabilitation, do we have even a vague sense of if we do the investments that are contemplated for 2018 and 2019, will we raise our PCI score by some aspirational amount? And I raise this because I noticed that we talk about our PCI having gone up to 60, but it's down below again. It's 59,
Right.
which is below fair. It's at risk, which is one of the negative categories for
Correct.
PCI. So I'd like to have a sense if we have a number that we're shooting for.
I don't have a specific number, but one of the things with this analysis that we're doing is to come back and have that very discussion of if we make these investments, this is what we get. And and have that discussion and see if that's the appropriate level and then adjust funding. I think one of the things that we need to, that at least the first runs of the discussion was a street like Cleveland. It's horrible and it's dragging down our overall PCI. So, and it's going to be a very expensive street, and I imagine nobody in Albany drives it unless they're getting their tires fixed or going to the batting cages. So we want to have that discussion and make sure we're making the investments. But I don't have a specific number right now, but we want to come back and give you that number.
I think talking about our PCI and how we get it up over a longer period of time
Correct.
and then keep it where it should be
Yes.
would be
That's
for a long-range planning discussion. Thank you. One other thing I wanted to mention, and I actually have something that I'm going to suggest deferring. And even though it's very near and dear to my heart, it's the Shrine Pocket Park and the associated path. I suspect that is, you're trying to coordinate that with the paving, the sewer rehabilitation and paving on Key Route. But I think that the Shrine of Freedom is something that I think really needs to be looked at as a community issue. I don't think people understand very well what it is. They think it's some kind of war memorial, which it is not, even though there are war memorials in the same area behind it. I think we need to have conversations about what it is and its historical role. We may need to speak with Exchange Club members and also with families of the fallen soldiers who are memorialized in the memorial behind the shrine. So I just think it's a bigger, and then what do we want in the heart, the very heart of our city? You know, this is a really, really prominent place, and I think there needs to be some community dialogue about what that should look like. So I would be inclined to say that the Shrine Pocket Park is something that ought to be deferred until more of a community process can be conducted.
I would agree.
Two quick things. I believe I'm sorry, Rochelle.
No, that's fine. Oh, well, okay, no, that's fine.
Okay, so quickly, my understanding is the current cycle track in front of our mixed-use project is on Caltrans right-of-way. And so does that mean that if the extension that we're contemplating would also be on the Caltrans right-of-way?
correct.
Okay. And I just want to put in a pitch because we made promises to the neighbors and to the middle school that we were going to finish those traffic circles promptly along Brighton Street, which is the street that runs east-west just south of the middle school. Is that still happening? Yeah. Oh, that's part of that whole project. Okay, that's fine. I'm done.
Just to reiterate, the lighting, I think, is very high on my list, and I agree with what Rochelle mentioned about the Pocket Park Key Route path. I think a lot more thinking has to go into that before we commit to doing something there. I'd put it much lower on the priority list. And then finally, and this is, I don't know how to bring this up we're talking about replacing a lot of our fleet, either the fire department or the police department or the city's fleet. If there's any way we can kind of factor in some kind of electric hybrid element to any of those to kind of, increase our attempt to lower our carbon footprint, I know every time I've mentioned this over the last 10 years, people roll their eyes and say, oh, you just can't get that kind of equipment.
We do.
That's energy efficient particularly. I know some of it is, and it is improving, but.
So we have done, and actually there's I think an agenda item tonight where we actually got a grant to replace, this is not vehicles, but it's some of our gas-powered mowers and things where
Gas-powered,
we're
yeah, right.
switching those. So we are looking at it, and it's point well taken. But
But I believe Claire and sustainability are also looking into that. I think Claire would like to see us go down that route as well. She mentioned that to me.
Aren't all of our, not our fire trucks, obviously, but all of our, and not our patrol cars, but all of the other cars that we're purchasing for staff are all hybrids, aren't they?
Typically, they are hybrids. That's the goal. It's in we have a green purchasing policy. So it will be dusted off as we
Yeah.
purchase vehicles. I know it's intermittent, but that is a
I guess I
focus.
would just say, just keep going towards that goal.
hybrids,
Yeah.
got it.
Thank you.
Yeah, hybrids or electric, actually.
I like, yep.
Electric even better.
Yeah,
Sneak up on the bad guys.
yeah. There you go. There you go. Michael, are you,
Yeah, I'm done.
okay. Sorry, did you finish?
No, I've said enough.
Speaking of vehicles, what I've wondered is if there's any room for efficiency in the police fleet. I noticed that there's included in the police fleet is 3 investigation vehicles, 3 command vehicles, and 3 support vehicles. And I don't know exactly what those are and what the purposes are, but those represent quite a few vehicles, not counting all the patrol vehicles. So if there's any room for efficiency, we might want to think there. I do see a lot of the police vehicles in the parking lot here, and I'm wondering if we're making the best use of having such a big fleet of those. And let's see. The fire department shortfall concerns me. I don't know if you're going to be speaking to that in a future council meeting, but I did notice that when I was reading through, and so that's also leads me to think about those police vehicles and whether or not we can do a balancing act so that both departments get the proper upgrades. One thing I noticed at a high level is that there were there's projects and there's funds, and so it was interesting to see where the funds funnel into which projects. And for some funds, you see a positive balance year after year. And I could flip through and figure out which ones they are, but there's quite a few that have a significant positive balance year over year, and then there's some that dip into the negative, indicating that, okay, we don't have funding sources for these. So what I was trying to figure out is, are we funneling our funds correctly such that, are we leaving too big a balance in some of these funds and not putting it into projects where we need to put it? Maybe you could speak to that at a high level.
Okay, so I think there are some of the negatives that you see are just some refinements we need to do in terms of we don't want to go negative in any one year in any one fund. So that might be some, and that's the purpose of this, is getting out there, getting your input, and then we'll go through and correct those. Some funds that have a growing balance may not be able to be used in other things. So I think sewer is one that we have a growing balance, and we can't use that on anything but sewer. And then some of the other funds also, I think, include some sort of not solely capital in there. So we want to be careful that we're not overspending the other side of that may not be reflected in the CIP. And so that's one of the corrections we'll have to go through and kind of pull those numbers out.
Okay. It did seem like, and maybe what I should do is just make my notes and send them to you offline, because as I went through, it did seem a little bit skewed.
Can I just
Sure.
The other thing we could add is more context for council. There's a group of funds that are strictly reimbursable. So if we make it clear that that should always be very close to a net zero balance, those are things are Measure B and Measure BB where we're getting reimbursed, or when there's another agency paying for something. There's projects there's funds, as Mark mentioned, that probably will have an ongoing balance because there's operating dollars that are connected to that fund. So if we just make a better attempt at maybe either communicating that through a staff report or putting it in here so that we can understand kind of grouping of these funds, which ones should have a balance moving forward, even if it's a small one, and which ones are targeted to have essentially net zero.
If you could do that, that'd be really helpful. Yeah.
I'll give it a shot.
Great, thank you. I had a few more.
Yeah, go ahead. I have a follow-up on what you.
Oh, do you want to just
About-
give you
no,
your follow-up right
go-
now?
go ahead.
Okay. By the way, are we fully staffed in Public Works right now?
Right now, we have all the open positions filled.
Okay. I'd make a plug for active transportation. I noticed that the funding is very low in that area. And I think we're shuffling Measure B and Measure BB money off to other areas, it seems. I don't know, I might not have done a very careful reading of it, but it does seem like active transportation under project categories was low funded, but it might be because active transportation projects fall into other categories too. Like I said, I saw some nods, maybe that's the case.
I think there's an active transportation project, and then there's a lot of active transportation elements that are embedded in other projects.
Okay, that makes
So
sense.
I think there's some scope definition that could probably help in that.
Okay, yeah, it was just, I was wondering about that but if you just look at the line item, it looks like, oh, we're not spending anything on that, but I'm sure that wasn't the case or the intention. So, and the sidewalk money, it seems like the sidewalk tax money is all going into capital. But are we, or can we, put sidewalk money into salaries for project managers of sidewalk projects?
So we haven't done that yet, and so we have done some things that are not just capital. In the fall, we did do a sidewalk shaving program, so it's not replacing, but it's going in and helping deal with some of the issues and shaving. It's not, the issues will still grow, but it puts it off a couple of years. This first year, we did not include salaries, but that's something we could do, and particularly once we get one under our belt, we'll look at maybe hiring someone to help us buy down that on a full-time basis, but on a sort of project-specific basis.
I just think it can maybe help the city going forward if we recognize that we have to allocate staff time to that. So some of that money should maybe not come out of general fund, but come out of the sidewalk fund so we can make sure we maintain that staff if we have an economic downturn. And let me see if there's one other. I just want to say, thank you for the for all this, for the presentation, for all the details. I think I agree with your goal of trying to do a more realistic set of projects and being able to deliver rather than aiming too high because there's a big wow factor to displaying all these projects to the public and the and to the council. I would much rather see us deliver on time, fewer projects than promise too much. So thank you for that. Rochelle, you had your follow-up?
Are we going to leave any room for public comment?
Rochelle will have her turn, and then we have, I guess, one member of the public here.
So there are no, I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with all of our staff, so there are no members of the public here tonight?
One gentleman just came in who may be interested, but, Okay.
He's not allowed to comment?
We had two publics and they left.
Drove them out. Okay, Rochelle, go.
Yeah. A couple of years ago, year and a half ago, we looked at the possibility of passing an amendment to Measure R. And we decided, after some back and forth and community input, to leave it as it was. And I think it is, although Measure R, the allocations were advisory and not strictly binding, I think it's important that we keep faith with whatever we tell the voters. If we say we're going to spend taxes a particular way, then it's really important, even if it's just an advisory measure, that we don't deviate from that unless there is a really, really crucial reason to do so. And 1/4 of the funding from that landscape and lighting district was devoted to new playfields for youth. And that included even maintenance of playfields for youth. And I saw that we were going to spend that money on the Shrine Pocket Park and Key Route Path, and I think that would be a problematical to a lot of people. That doesn't sound like playfields for youth. I think that on the other hand, this project in Ocean View Park improvements looks like it, for which we're planning to use WW funds, that looks like something that could be paid for out of Measure R. I don't know. You know, they almost seem like you'd flip those two funding sources. Also, when we've had to put additional money into the JPA, for example, when we needed to pay Albany's share of the shock pad so that we could have a new shock pad as well as carpeting for the Bates playfields, that would all, it seems to me, qualify for Measure R, and I don't think that we used that. I think that we used surplus funds. Go ahead.
So on the Bates Field, we have an annual contribution that does come out of Measure R. But
does, good.
I think our contribution to the upgrades came out of a different funding source. So
Let's keep think about the fact that we do have playfield money, and if we ever do playfields in the new Thompson Park, or if we are asked to contribute to finally creating the one unbuilt field down there, that we remember this funding source.
Okay, I want to add my thanks to you for both of you and all your staffs for all the work you've done on this and bringing us this update. And now it'll come back to us again in March-ish, which is
March-ish.
between April-ish and February-ish?
Yeah.
Okay.
A lot of ish.
Great-ish. Great, well, we look forward to seeing it then.
All right.
And thank you ever so much.
Sure thing.
And we have about a 2-minute break.
March is strictly between
Please join Councilmember Pilch in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. May we have a roll call, please?
Councilmember Barnes stepped
sure he's
away.
returning.
He'll be right back. Councilmember Moss,
Here.
Councilmember Pilch.
Here.
Vice Mayor Nason,
Here.
Mayor McQuaid.
Here. We have two ceremonial items this evening. I put a statement on our website in honor of Dr. Martin Luther King, and we haven't met since his birthday, and so I thought I would read it tonight. Today we celebrate the birth of Dr. Martin Luther King. We honor his courage, leadership, and ability to speak the truth in a way that inspired so many. The King Center in Atlanta recognizes that between December 1955, which was the Montgomery bus boycott, and April 4th, 1968, when he was assassinated, Dr. King was the leader of the modern American civil rights movement. African Americans achieved more genuine progress toward racial equality in America than during the previous 350 years. Dr. King is widely regarded as America's preeminent advocate of nonviolence and one of the greatest nonviolent leaders in world history. Now, 50 years later, our country feels divided and hate-filled. Our national leaders continue to fuel the fires of distrust and fear through their vulgar and racist rhetoric and actions. Dr. King once said, "He who passively accepts evil is as much involved in it as he who helps to perpetrate it. He who accepts evil without protesting against it is really cooperating with it." There is no better way to honor Dr. King than to stand up to those who would divide us, to educate those whose fears are driven by ignorance, and to reassure those who are afraid. We do this both individually and as a community. I'm proud of the many ways Albany stands up against evil. We are a sanctuary city. In September, the City Council passed Resolution 2017-74, supporting the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals Program, DACA. Our business community has filled their windows with a variety of signs proclaiming all are welcome, including Albany Stands United Against Hate signs that were provided by the city. We have put into place programs and policies to assist those who are most vulnerable. Community members came together challenging both the city and the school district to do better, to really listen to each other and to recognize and improve upon our shortcomings. For the 9th year, the City of Albany is hosting Commit to Serve Week, January 8th to 16th. Visit the Community Center foyer for resources, contacts, and ideas to assist in making a pledge of service to your community. Take this opportunity to become a block captain, a CERT volunteer, volunteer your child's school, or help that elderly neighbor with their yard work. Together, we can make a difference in our community. Together, we can positively answer life's most persistent and urgent question asked by Dr. King. What are you doing for others? The opportunities are limitless for making a difference in someone's life, spreading kindness, and standing against injustice by following the example set by Dr. Martin Luther King. I also have a statement on sanctuary cities. On April 17, 2017, the Albany City Council unanimously passed Resolution 2017-9, declaring Albany a sanctuary city. I want to reassure all of our community members that the City of Albany stands firm in that commitment. We recognize that many in our community are feeling fearful and unsafe due to recent threats from Washington regarding potential increased enforcement by federal immigration officials. I will continue to work with staff and our state and federal elected officials to ensure the legal rights of our community are upheld. I've asked the interim city manager to update and keep current our website and social media platforms with information and resources regarding immigration assistance. The City of Albany is committed to recognizing the dignity and civil rights of all of our community members, including the right of all community members to live, work, and study in a city that does not subject them to fear, prejudicial treatment, or discrimination. The consent calendar. Consent calendar items are considered to be routine by the City Council and will be enacted by one motion. By approval of the consent calendar, the staff recommendations will be adopted unless otherwise modified by the City Council. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a council member or member of the audience requests removal of the items from the consent calendar. Does any council member wish to pull an item?
511.
Anyone else?
I have a question about 5.4.
Okay. Any others? Okay. Any members of the public? I've never seen such a full audience and no public. Okay, 5.4.
So my quick question is this is eucalyptus tree pruning, and it says in the staff report there'll be a kind of a gradual elimination of eucalyptus trees to encourage the understory trees, the native oaks and toyons, et cetera. You know, I wondered while I was reading that, there's a large annual monarch butterfly population up there that seems to do just fine in the eucalyptus trees. Is something like that considered when we're looking at them?
Okay, so the scope of the work under this contract is actually tree removal, so it's looking at hazardous tree removals, and the Albany Hill Master Plan includes two sort of provisions for tree removal. One of them is going to an annual hazardous tree assessment, and then it's the discussion of sort of slowly transforming or getting rid of the ukes and allowing more natives to grow. With respect to the monarchs, one of the projects that's funded through Measure R and in the Albany Hill Master Plan is actually a monarch survey and understanding habitat and where they are. And that did not go to council because I think it's a $10,000 contract and below the threshold. But we have someone actively doing that right now.
So before we cut down the last eucalyptus tree,
Yes.
we
Yes.
may have some sense of whether they were benefiting the monarchs.
There's plenty of ukes up there. This isn't going to change that.
Okay.
This is really just picking off what we think are hazardous trees along, forget the road, but along the roadway, and making sure that it's really a hazardous mitigation and not really a tree removal to promote natives.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and 5.11?
511, I don't have any issue with this. I just wanted to add a clarification that's provided to me by staff, which is that we'll be discussing ballot measures before you go off and work on language. But I would, I actually did have a question of clarification now that I think of it. Part of the scope of the contract is to help with the language, is it not? Because I know that even though we can come up with the questions, exactly how you formulate those questions can be important, and a polling company could know a lot about that. So is that in the scope of the contract?
To confirm your question, language for the polling survey or language for the actual ballot measure?
For the polling survey.
Yes, no,
Yeah.
that is
Okay.
exactly what that firm would
Okay.
assist us with.
Oh, great. Okay, that's what I would expect. And then, so we'll be talking about the ballot measures before you go off and do your questions. And also, I would hope that before those questions are finalized, that they be brought to the council. That would be my preference.
The survey questions?
Yeah.
We'll have to think that through a bit. As you'll see in the recommendations from the consultant, there's a bit of concern with that contaminating the survey results.
I see.
The data and the statistical significance of having it be a survey that those taking the survey haven't seen, and that helps them not have a predetermined response to some of the questions.
That makes a lot of sense. Perhaps if it were at all appropriate to bring it to a closed session, a quick closed session item, that would be my preference.
I don't know if that meets the criteria.
I don't think we'd have a basis for a session. There's no threat of litigation,
Okay.
anything like that.
All right, well, good luck to you.
But what I can add to help reassure that process is that when staff does bring back detailed discussion of possible ballot measures, we will really get to a point where we know what questions we want to ask and what answers we want to receive. So I think some of that will come through the discussion of the council, and the subcommittee will take that information forward.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you very much.
Okay, may I get a motion to approve the consent calendar, please?
So moved?
Second.
Poll the council, please.
Councilmember Barnes?
Yes.
Councilmember Moss?
Yes.
Councilmember Pilch?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Nason?
Yes.
Mayor McQuaid?
Yes, and the motion carries. Good of the city, a time for persons desiring to address the city council on an item that is not on the agenda. Please note, city policy limits each speaker to 3 minutes. The Brown Act limits the council's ability to take and/or discuss items that are not on the agenda. Therefore, such items are normally referred to staff for comment or to a future agenda. Seeing no members of the public, we will move on. Council member reports on meetings attended and announcement of future meetings, city manager report. Councilmember Pilch, would you like to start?
No, because I'm not quite ready. If you can make me last, if you would.
Councilmember Moss and I attended a JPA. This is the JPA that relates to management of the sports complex at the foot of Gilman, the Bates Fields, on Tuesday, January 17th. The great news is that the artificial turf replacement project with the shock pad is ahead of schedule. They are looking at the third week of February and probably opening March 3rd, which is three weeks or so ahead of schedule. And then they also mentioned another matter of interest is that the Berkeley, most recently passed Berkeley infrastructure bond includes planning and permitting funding for a new field house at the north end of the complex. So we should be seeing that come along, and we should be anticipating a request for funds to pitch in to help with that.
Great, thank you.
I don't think there was anything else. Okay.
Okay, anything for you?
Sure. Well, as Rochelle mentioned, there was a JPA meeting last Wednesday. Most interesting, the other interesting part of that whole meeting was who's using the Gilman Fields. Albany gets a lot of use out of the Gilman Fields. We are 23% of the participants down there, although we represent only about 7% of the total population of the 5 cities in the JPA. And, as Rochelle mentioned, we will probably be hit up for some of the funding, and whether in the future that how much cities are asked to contribute may get to be closer to how many of their players or how many people there come from each city that are participating down there. The other meeting that I went to was on the 11th. There was a recycling board meeting. The main things on the agenda was a program review of the last 5 years on different projects they're doing. There was commentary on the current state of the recycling market. Basically, the analysis we got was don't panic. Although China is no longer accepting a lot of different things, some market will appear to take our recycled goods. And just a lot of discussion on improving the metrics for figuring out what is going into the trash and how much of it is good stuff, as I say, that could be recycled. One side out of that is that Albany, of all of Alameda County, has one of the highest diversion rates of good stuff out of the trash. So we can all pat ourselves on the back for doing well in that area.
It's excellent.
Yes, the mayor and I attended an interesting meeting at the Applied Ethics Center of the Business School at the University of Santa Clara. There was a former legislator, Joe Simidian, who was termed out and who's also been, he's been involved in the public sector most of his life from Palo Alto. I think he's a county commissioner now, but he decided to go to visit 3 counties deep in the heart of Trumpville and Trumpland, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and one in Illinois, sort of old steel towns, and he just had, casual conversations with lots of people about the state of the economy there and their beliefs. And then the first part of that was public, and then there's a closed roundtable with just local public sector folks like the mayor and I, and we had kind of a roundtable discussion about sort of the state of politics federally and what can be done to reinvigorate the economies of some of these places that have been left behind. It was pretty thoughtful, and he was a thoughtful guy. And they typically do something like this once a year, because I recall Penelope and the mayor, the former city manager, had gone to another one previously. So it was a day well spent.
I attended the League of California Cities State Budget Briefing and Public Safety Policy Committee, and I added my report to the agenda. But I will summarize it, that the governor is recommending most of the surplus be kept in the reserves. But the good news is he's recommending fully funding local control funding formula for public schools. And the proposed budget includes $4.5 billion in new funding for state and local transportation projects from SB 1. And I'm now on the Public Safety Policy Committee, as is Fire Chief Calkins. So we attended that policy committee meeting and discussed the governor's budget as it relates to public safety, the implications of the Attorney General's memo on cannabis, and we received updates on several other items. I also attended the Alta Bates Task Force meeting, the Alameda County Mayor's Conference. I went to the art show opening at the community center, and once again, it's a fabulous show. If you haven't seen it, be sure to go by and check it out. It's amazing. And the artist was actually there painting while the exhibit was doing the opening. It was really fun. Participated in a Climate Mayor's conference call, and Vice Mayor Nason and I met with the CEO of Sutter Hospital to talk about the impending closure of Alta Bates and how it will impact Albany. Do we have a city manager report?
I'm
sorry.
Okay. I screwed you up by asking to go last. So yeah, I was in Sacramento the day before for the Environmental Quality Policy Committee. Also heard the same briefing on the budget. I forgot my notes on that to see if there's anything else to add, but I think the mayor got most of it. In the Environmental Quality Policy Committee, we discussed the goals, one of which was to make sure we support CCAs in the state. And we talked about a potential bill called the Safe and Affordable Drinking Water Fund, which intends to give funding to disadvantaged cities who do not have the funds to get their own safe drinking water. And while members supported that idea, the funding would come from existing water districts around the state, and I think members had a problem with the funding source, allowing other water districts or making other water districts fund this fund. They thought there should be some other funding mechanism, so we'll see where that ends up. We also discussed SB 1383, which is an organic waste diversion bill, which passed already, and I don't know that we'll have much to do with this. This will mostly be in the hands of our waste contractors, but it specifies certain that the organic waste needs to go somewhere. That needs to be dealt with in a certain way. There's certain things that the cities will be required to do. In our case, it will be through the people who collect our waste to make sure that they're either using it for some purpose like composting, or using it for methane generation or what have you. But that's coming down the line in a number of years. And then we got a legislative update. And speaking of CCAs, I went to the last East Bay Community Energy meeting. meeting. Those meetings, as I mentioned previously, are heating up. We'll have another meeting early February and then mid-February as well, because the rubber is really hitting the road where we're starting to talk about rates and the amount of greenhouse gases that are going to be in the default mix that people will be paying for. And I advocated for something that staff asked me to advocate for, which I wanted to advocate for anyway, which was to make sure that in the default rate, we beat PG&E for greenhouse gas reductions. In other words, our mixture will be more greenhouse gas free than PG&E's. It's also a goal that our rate be slightly lower than PG&E's. This is something that all the CCAs are doing in order to make sure they get buy-in from the public. But both of those things also have to be matched with making sure we can pay for that successfully, that we, that doesn't break the bank. So it's the EBC now is quite well staffed. They're up to 8 to 10 administrative members, and so they're really working hard to make sure we can roll this out to the muni accounts in April. And then I have a question. Did the mayor and vice mayor attend was there a 2x2x2 meeting?
No, there wasn't.
Oh, I see. Okay. I was wondering if you attended that and had a report, but you obviously don't because there wasn't. Very good. And I think that's all I have.
I have a question about the East Bay Energy. When we began, one of the perks, shall we say, was job creation, and we had talked about that was something we were really interested in, but we also wanted to see jobs coming to this end of the county, primarily to Albany. Has that piece of it come up yet?
That's a good question because it's quite a tension actually in the meetings. The job creation would come through the local business development plan, and that's a part of the whole entire work plan for EBCE. But as the CEO, I think, is correctly directing, the first task of the new agency is to make sure we can be successful just rolling out the program and just replacing the PG&E program with ours. And that's caused a lot of consternation among people who really want to see that the local business stuff and the local job development get created. But I think that that still will happen, but there's really no updates because we need to defer that to make sure we're successful with the rollout first.
Thank you. And I have one other question as it relates to the JPA with the Batesfield. I'm interested that our participation is so high, and I think I'd like to see us develop an agenda item. I'm thinking about the Little League and the girls' sports issue, and I think that we need to be lobbying our state legislators to look at that law and to see if our residents participating in a facility that happens to be in Berkeley, but it's our teams, how we can count those numbers. And so without totally violating the Brown Act, I'd like us to consider such an agenda topic. Now, do you have a city manager report?
Yeah. Oh, excuse me. A quick update for you. We are still looking for the grand opening of Peggy Thompson Pierce Street Park. We anticipate that it will be the end of February. As soon as we have a solidified date, we will send out save the dates and promote that loud and clear. A couple of things happened today, one of which I attended a meeting with Senator Skinner regarding sanctuary cities and concerns about possible customs and immigration enforcement that may happen locally. What we've done proactively, and we will continue to do, as mentioned by the mayor, is put information out on our website. Understood we're one piece of a much bigger puzzle with some dynamic issues involved in this topic. However, as you see here, we are referring people to what is called the ICE Activity Hotline. Other cities are utilizing this resource as well. It has a wealth of information on this website. And again, as we update information on this topic, it will be included both on our website and additional media streams as well. Lastly, I want to encourage people to apply for our Albany Civics Academy. The application deadline is March 22nd, and it's a great opportunity to get to know the city and get some behind-the-scenes knowledge of what happens at all of our desks and departments, and perhaps you even get to ride on a backhoe. So again, go to our website and apply. We welcome everyone. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, the next item that we have is 10-1, safety and traffic calming improvements on Washington Avenue between Pierce and Cerrito. May we have a staff report, please?
Leda Andrino Chavez and our consultant Lawrence Lewis will make a presentation to the council.
Thank you. Good evening, council members, members of the public. We have the Washington Avenue traffic calming project, and thank you. And the action requested tonight is to amend the capital improvement plan to include the neighborhood proposal to modify the curbs, to create parking turnouts along this corridor, construction of a raised crosswalk on Washington Avenue, slightly east of Catherine's Walk, which is by the crest of the Washington Hill, and also to study the feasibility of installing speed humps between Cerrito and Polk Streets, which is the flatter area of the hill, and to implement a pilot program to encourage residents not to park on the sidewalks along one side of the 800 block of the Washington Avenue Hill. As a way of background, we started working on this project in 2012 when the Albany Active Transportation Plan was being developed. The residents of this block approached staff and with issues like the cut-through traffic from San Pablo Avenue to the freeway, particularly at night, speeding by the hill, which right now is posted at 15 miles per hour. So there was traffic going faster than that, and accessibility on the sidewalks by motor vehicles parked on the sidewalks, and garbage bins, overgrown vegetation that actually didn't comply with ADA accessibility in pedestrians walking. So these are some pictures of the issues. We have a picture there of a vehicle with a garbage can, and we had a study, an assessment done by the University of California Transportation Center. Cutouts and Associates was the consulting firm working on this project, and we conducted assessment evaluations, and the proposal came up a little bit of these pictures here, which is basically prohibiting, implementing partial barriers along Pierce Street with the implementation of 3 wells in high visibility crosswalks by the intersection of Washington and Gateview with curb extensions. This is the center of the corridor, basically implementing the raised crosswalk by Catherine's Walk, and red zoning the curbs along the corridor on most of the segments there. There's also curb extensions, additional stop sign on Polk, and also bulb outs at the intersection of Cerrito and Washington, with continuing with the 3 wells. Again, this is the red zone on the north side of the corridor, and allowing parking on the south side of Washington. So we presented this proposal to the Traffic and Safety Commission, and the commission directed staff to try a phased trial implementation as a pilot program. We started in the spring of 2013, installing the signage and paving markings along the hill for 15 miles per hour speed. And later in the year, we installed barricades to simulate the bulb outs. We conducted before and after survey, speed and volume survey for after every implementation, and we had compared with some results. Overall, the phase implementation was effective by reducing 85th percentiles, approximately, 7%, and a reduction of the volume from about 26% from the baseline to the, like after the barricade experimentation. So in the fall of 2013, the Traffic and Safety Commission forwarded a recommendation to Council that included the a variation of the UC Berkeley proposal, which is basically staggered red curves, bulb outs at Gateview, Polk and Cerrito, and the raised crosswalk by the Catherine's Walk. Council approved recommendation and asked staff to consider mini roundabouts at the Gateview and at the Cerrito Street intersections with Washington. So this is the proposal that was approved in 2014. So if you want to see it again, so I'm sorry, just went too fast. Okay. So these eliminated approximately 24 parking spaces along the corridor. So, so in the winter of 2014, Kittleson and Associates was retained to conduct the project and design the bulb outs and the mini roundabouts. And in 2016, the neighborhood presented, we were doing that project, and the neighborhood presented staff with an alternative design to approach to this, to realign curves at selected locations to allow for parking turnouts and recover some of the parking that would be lost by the red zones. We held two informal community meetings to discuss the technical analysis for the feasibility that was continued by Kittleson and Associates. And on June 2017, the Traffic and Safety Commission issued a recommendation to Council. So I'm going to introduce Lawrence Lewis of Kittleson and Associates to explain the assessment of the neighborhood proposal to you.
Thank you, and good evening. Lawrence Lewis with Kittleson Associates. As part of one of the informal community meetings that was referenced, we worked with the neighborhood to identify or to define what the primary objectives of the project were, since at that time there were several improvement ideas that had been identified at that time. So this was a way to make sure that we were all collectively on the same page regarding what the outcomes of the project should be. And so those were in general priority order, providing a pedestrian pathway and minimizing loss of on-street parking. I'd say these were the higher priorities for the project. And then to a lesser extent, reducing speeding and reducing the potential for cut-through traffic. While those were important issues, they weren't necessarily identified as the primary priorities, in part because some of the initial measures had already begun to reduce some of the speeds along Washington Avenue. And then as part of just documenting some of the trade-offs amongst the options, we identified some other considerations, primarily cost and time frame for implementation to capture some of those issues. And so this was just a summary table for the primary options, parking restrictions, a mid-block raised crosswalk, converting one Washington Avenue to one-way, and then the parking cutouts that were proposed by the neighborhood members. So with the parking restrictions, again, the downside or the negative is that it does remove parking, which again was a priority for the neighborhood that was expressed. The mid-block raised crosswalk, the impacts in terms of parking were really limited to the area around the crosswalk so that you have visibility, but it did not necessarily do anything to address providing a continuous pedestrian pathway. Converting the street to one-way, again, it maintains parking, it restores the existing sidewalk, but there were also some other considerations in terms of people having less direct access to their residences. Parking cutouts, again, this is the concept that was suggested by the neighborhood that we evaluated. It does allow for the use of the sidewalks. It does go further in terms of maintaining parking. The only trade-off is just that in terms of implementation, it may require some sort of retaining wall or additional engineering just to make sure that the sidewalks can be cut in. And so as part of this work, we did just take an initial look at the feasibility of the parking cutouts as proposed for the various locations along the corridor. Again, the primary issue in terms of feasibility was really that some locations would require perhaps a retaining wall so that the parking cutouts could be implemented and the sidewalk could be maintained on both sides of the street. So I'll hand it back over.
Yeah, so the reiterate is that, again, the action requested tonight is to amend the capital improvement plan to include the neighborhood proposal to modify the curbs, to create the parking turnouts, the construction of the raised crosswalk, and also to direct staff for feasibility of installing speed humps between Cerrito and Polk, and to implement a pilot program to encourage residents not to park on sidewalks on one side of the block. And we will entertain questions.
Other questions from council?
Yeah, so the cutouts would be all along the north side, or there's some on the south side?
They're on both
They're on
sides.
both sides.
Yeah.
Both sides, okay. And so, okay, let me get back to that. So in 2014, I think probably before three of us were seated is when the council approved the previous plan. But then the resident, while you were getting the plans drawn up, doing the plans, the residents brought forward an alternative plan. And staff worked with the residents at that time and then basically stopped the project, or not stopped it, but
Change the scope of the project.
changed the scope to accommodate those plans. But that was not brought back to the council at that time, correct? That is all done by staff, correct?
No, yeah.
Okay.
We process it through the Traffic and Safety Commission.
Oh, it was brought to the Traffic and Safety Commission, the alternative, okay.
And when was that?
It's 2016, when we started changed the scope and then started with this idea, which basically would be just evaluating the feasibility of the neighborhood proposal.
Yeah, I don't think it's bad at all. In fact, I think it's good to have considered the neighborhood plan, but I don't recall being informed as a council that we were changing the scope, and changing the scope of something that the council already approved strikes me as a little bit problematic. But I'll just state that and move on. And that's all the questions I had at the moment.
Brazil?
Have police and fire weighed in on these various plans? For example, the obvious question is, Can you get a fire truck down that street under all these plans? What do the police and fire chiefs say?
Well, the bulb outs, the turnouts, the parking turnouts would actually not narrow the street, but making it a little bit, providing more right-of-way for traffic or vehicular traffic instead, because it's encroaching into the existing sidewalk and making parking turnouts. So it's contrary to the original proposal, which is in 2014, that would, in a way, allow parking on one side of the street, and also with the bulb outs and the turnout in the mini roundabouts, that would affect the. That would have to be, evaluated by the fire department because of the right-of-way invasion, I would say.
Yeah,
In this case,
I would like to see that happen, but I mean, I have no idea whether under which of these plans you can get a fire truck down the street or not. It's kind of a showstopper for me.
So the existing situation we have on the street today is the worst. We have people violating the law, parking on a sidewalk, and we have very narrow room for police and firefighters to maneuver their equipment. So all these things are better. We do consult with both departments on a pretty regular basis on all sorts of things, particularly when we get in with the fire engines, when we get into the specific engineering, we work with them with their equipment. So what we're trying to do is figure out a way to give them, improve from their current situation without displacing, we're trying to minimize the displacement of street parking. And with respect to parking regulation enforcement, Lieutenant Geisberger is here this evening and can elaborate on this, but I think that this has been a long-standing practice to not enforce along Washington, and so I think we all, at the staff level, agree that the consultation with the council before implementing and getting your thoughts on how that program should unroll are important to get from you this evening.
And we don't have any costs associated with some of these plans. For example, I imagine building retaining walls would be very expensive.
That's correct. We were, if you were to give us direction to further explore this, that would be the next step, is to take it from kind of a conceptual planning level that the basic dimensions will probably work, and then look at it three-dimensionally with things like retaining walls, things like drainage, which are really difficult to estimate until we look at the grade changes and the volumes of concrete and road work that would be necessary to implement them.
All right, here's a hypothetical. Let's say you eliminated the sidewalk on one side, allowed, and that would effectively widening the street by getting rid of one of the sidewalks, not letting people park on the other sidewalk, and then that should give you enough room. I'm asking the question, would that give you enough room for having parking on both sides of the street? And then the cost of doing that, I presume, would be you'd have to recrown the street and then do drainage on the edge of the street.
Right. That would be a difficult to be able to evaluate how that would work exactly. The part of the function of the sidewalk and the curb is to be part of the drainage system. I don't know if Lawrence and Leda want to add to that.
Well, you and I have discussed that before, and then we, at high level, we said we have to really build a trench, for the drainage, which is very, very expensive, and also it would mean eliminating, concrete and allowing vehicles to park on both sides of the street. It will allow that. But at this point, without a survey, we don't have a good sense of how much it would cost.
I'll just say one more thing. I've been in discussion with various bicyclists about due to ways cut through traffic on through the park on Wildcat Canyon Road and then dropping down. What I heard from one traffic engineer is that, as a rule, they like to avoid putting speed humps and diversionary traffic type controls on steep, curvy roads because it can cause cars to lose control. And you've all seen that scene in Bullet where you're going down those big hills, and you don't want that to happen on this street because there's a big speed hump and it's launching cars into the air, even if they should have been going slower. So I'll just conclude by saying I'm very skeptical of putting speed bumps on steep streets.
So a general question, because I was on council in 2014 when this first came up. Have the nature of the problems changed as this went along? It's my kind of vague recollection that the issue we were kind of talking about then was the whole idea of cut-through traffic, people using Washington as a way of avoiding Buchanan or going by the police station late at night after one too many rounds at the Mallard Club or something. But and as this thing got kind of worked over, it seems like the issues around sidewalks and sidewalk blocking took over.
I think I think all those issues have been there, and it kind of depends who you talk to.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know that, from the city staff perspective, our highest priority should be safety and public safety. And so that, cut-through traffic is very annoying and it's a nuisance, but it's not as much of a safety issue as forcing a pedestrian to walk in the middle of the street. So I don't know if that gets directly at your question.
May I?
Yeah, I think Aleda can add to that.
Oh, as you can see, this is from 2012. I think the cut-through traffic was still there, and that's basically how the community approached staff to say, we have this problem, cut-through traffic, speeding on a 15-mile-per-hour zone, and the motor vehicle parking on sidewalks. So it seems to me that the problems still are kind of the same at this point. Of course, with the background is that people don't want to lose their parking, and street parking. And some of these things cannot be solved without eliminating some parking or impacting parking.
Okay.
Street parking.
And my other question was, and when you were mocking up curb outs with barricades and things, was there ever an attempt to mock out doing one-way traffic or some kind of something that would divert traffic maybe at Polk Street or Cerrito Street, and
we didn't
you could
test
turn
that.
right or left, but you couldn't.
We didn't test it because when we proposed, and one of the many meetings, the one-way approach was not very popular and was not something that the Traffic and Safety Commission felt has enough support from the residents. That happened three years ago. Things might change right now.
Okay. All right. Good for now.
Okay, I have a lot of questions. I was actually on Traffic and Safety when we sent this to council the first time 100 years ago. Could you, in a nutshell, give me the difference between the Traffic and Safety recommendation B and D? They do seem really similar to me. I'm not sure what the differences are.
B and D. Right. So one is development of plans for the design and modifications of the parking turnouts, and
Now, which one is that? Is that D? I mean, is that B?
that's B.
So B are the bulb outs.
The turnout, the carve out. Yeah, the carve outs.
Okay, wait. Only a lady gets to talk right now. The parking cutouts.
Turnouts. Yeah.
Okay.
And D is work with the residents, because some of these turnouts are not feasible along all the proposed locations that they presented. Some might not be feasible. So then work with the residents to implement a pilot plan for changing parking patterns along this block to allow full pedestrian access on one side of the street and delay implementation of the approved red zones and curb parking enforcement. So this is kind of like testing the elimination of a sidewalk on one side of the street.
Okay, and staff did not support this recommendation. Am I correct in that?
So D is in a sense try to get a voluntary compliance that people, ask people not to park on the sidewalk.
Okay, fine.
And our feeling is, well, first of all, I'm not sure how to do that. And secondly, again, if we're going to prioritize safety, the bottom line is we have to enforce don't park on the sidewalk.
And then I guess my other question, and I think Lieutenant Geisberger, this is probably for you. Direct staff to develop a program for enforcement of restrictions on sidewalk parking along the 800 block of Washington. Can you talk a little bit about what that would look like?
So that would probably be something where we would do once it gets decided what's going to be done, where we would probably do 30 days of information that gets put out on cars. It wouldn't be every day us going out there putting notices on cars. And then we would roll into a warning phase, which would probably be another 30 days or so, where we would write warning notices. The vehicles that get warning notices would be logged in our system. And then we would move into a third phase, which would be kind of a combination of citations for vehicles that had already been given warnings, and then warnings to new cars that have not received that.
Great, thank you. Do you have another question?
I do, yeah, follow up. So if we did that, if we enforced parking, not parking on the sidewalk, would staff be okay with that, or would that cause some other problem to the configuration of the street that we would have to then correct? In other words, the cars move back out onto the street. Does that, I mean, that obviously solves the problem of them parking on the sidewalk. Does that create some other problems?
So it also would need to be red zoned. So the person who's parking on the sidewalk today it would be a red zone. They wouldn't be allowed to park in that same location.
Oh, because so you are saying that there's not enough room in the street there.
Exactly.
Okay, all right. So that essentially we would have to eliminate those parking places that aren't really parking places right now. Okay, got it. Thank you.
So also, the other side of the corridor will be red zone, and that side where the parks are allowed to park also would be. I mean, so
both sides would be red.
Yeah.
Got it.
Do you have any other questions? Okay. Can I just see a show of hands real quick? How many people plan to speak on this item? 1, 2, 3. Okay, you have 3 minutes. Try to keep it less than that. Be sure you turn in your speaker cards. And again, if somebody's already said what you want to say, it's real easy to just say, I agree with that.
You can bring your speaker card as you are coming up. So the first person, Michael Gold.
If we mainly use red curbs as the solution to people parking on the sidewalk, the lane of travel becomes wider, and people will drive faster. Red curbs are not a safety solution. When you paint curbs red, the speeders win. Now, some sidewalks are actually wider than required. So it's possible to widen somewhat, yet maintain the 4-foot sidewalks. It's possible. I've seen assessments that use the word low feasibility. In some cases, I respectfully disagree. I think in many spots, widening can be a matter of inches, not feet. And even the design rules for accessible sidewalks acknowledge that designers don't have to specify impractical measures. So by all means, let's get the pricing on the parking carve-outs. We are going to have to beware of over-specified designs that cost too much and will never be budgeted. Parking spots don't need to be 20 feet long. Some cars fit in 12 feet or less when there's an adjacent driveway for maneuvering in and out. Now, Washington Street is a legal, non-conforming road. It's hard to see what could ever make it conform. I think mostly street standards don't say old roads have to conform to new codes. They just need to increase safety and accessibility, not decrease it. Better doesn't have to be perfect. Now, emergency access is important. Modest widening and other good design practices can preserve and improve emergency access. Besides, effective traffic calming will reduce emergencies in the first place. But consider this. Between Cerrito and Polk, the driveways are at least 15 yards apart or less in the first place. That leaves room for emergency vehicles to extend their equipment. Now, maybe some other night we can talk about exact traffic calming measures that should be in the cost estimate. I and others have noticed literally dozens of creative and economical ways that Albany is doing it and surrounding communities are providing needed emergency access while calming traffic, enhancing safety, and preserving parking. It's a unique set of circumstances, but it can be done, I think. Finally, council members, please ensure that the design measures for improved accessibility really accomplish what they're intending. I've learned that for decades there are some Washington Street neighbors, who've used parking spots that have become important to them for accessibility and now help preserve senior citizens' autonomy and independence. Thank you.
Thank you.
Preston Jordan, Chris Kent.
Council and staff, thank you for taking up this issue once again. Speaking for Albany Strollers and Rollers, this issue of sidewalk parking first came to its attention in 2011 during the active transportation planning process. And so this has been going on for a number of years. Strollers and Rollers' position is that it would like the sidewalk on one side of the street clear consistently so that people can use the sidewalk. During discussions around this street and which sidewalk should be prioritized within the city, within the organization, we learned that actually this street is used by quite a number of people who don't actually live right in those blocks. So it's apparently a main travel way for students who are heading to high school who live on Pierce Street, and it's a main travel way for people who live on the hill heading down to the Transbay bus stop, which is quite close to Washington and Pierce. So on that basis, it was suggested that it should be part of Albany's priority sidewalk network, and so it's kind of ironic that a priority sidewalk has a sort of a, well, it's really de jure direction to the police not to enforce state law against sidewalk parking there. And it's really a safety issue. And I think at this point, with 5 years of written and video record that the city is not enforcing state law, if somebody gets hit up there because they have to walk on the sidewalk, we're all going to pay. I mean, we're all legally exposed because of that situation that's been allowed to continue. So Albany Strollers and Rollers asks that you pass a measure that will assure on a continuing basis the sidewalk on the south side has at least 4 feet of clearance so that people with strollers and otherwise can use that sidewalk and not have to go in the street. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
After Chris Kent will be Carol and Francis.
Hello, I'm Chris Kent. I live at 808 Cerrito. At the back of my house, the access is on Washington. So I'm going to walk through a little bit of how we got here quickly. So 2012, the report was done. I think the analysis was good, but the solution was very simplistic. It was just basically red line, a lot of red lines, and we've taken care of the problem. But as stated, it just increased traffic. So to solve that, then 2 big traffic circles were designed, which just eliminates more parking. It was a very heavily engineered solution. That's what caused the neighborhood to get together to say this has got to be a better way. We looked at it, and it's really, as has been stated, but I want to simplify it as 3 issues: the parking, the pedestrian access, and emergency vehicle. So we're trying to find the balance. Everybody says, well, we have to do it to code. Well, it can't be done to code, so you're going to have to choose which codes you're going to push or come, it's a choice here because we can't do it to strict codes. We came up with the parking cutout because we think it solves the best of both worlds. It provides emergency egress, it gets the cars off the sidewalk, and it retains most of the parking. True, it might be more expensive. They talk about retaining walls. There's some areas the retaining walls are only 10 inches high. It's very minimal work. Other areas it's very massive, and maybe we wouldn't do any cutouts there. But the cutout solution is a nuanced, it's non-traditional, it takes a closer look. It is a little bit more expensive, but it's really, in our opinion, the only solution that'll work without increasing traffic or making it much more difficult for people to access their houses. Thank you.
Thank you.
I just have a couple of comments. I live on Washington at the intersection of Cerrito. And someone mentioned speed bumps being impossible on steep streets. Washington is actually almost 2 different blocks. Between Cerrito and Polk, there's not very much rise, but between Polk and Pierce, it is very steep, up and down. And I think a speed bump between Cerrito and Polk might be possible, and I'd like you to, check that out. The raised walk at Catherine's Walk was something that was proposed like years ago, and I had thought that it was already on the proposal, and I would like to see that happen too. I think these modified speed bumps, speed humps, will decrease the pass-through traffic because it will slow it down. I'm definitely not in favor of red striping anything. And I agree with what our previous speakers have said. Thank you.
Thank you.
After Francis will be Noe.
Thank you. Thank you, councilors, for the time on this subject. Name's Francis Chapman. I live at 844 Washington. I actually was one of the 2 people who kicked off this whole thing 5.5 years ago with Tish Berlin. Couple questions I want to point to. Why are cars on the sidewalk? If you look at Curtis Street in our town, it's just about as narrow, maybe 6 inches wider, and you don't have cars on the sidewalk at all. You have cars doing alternating, effectively alternating one-way street. My theory is cars are on the sidewalk on Washington because of the speeding and the volume. My mirror got clipped. When I first moved to Washington, I parked on the street on purpose, try to slow things down. Mirror got clipped within 3 days. It actually got clipped by a car going the opposite direction, coming probably from the Mallard. It was sometime late at night. We've had a long string of DUIs. We've had a car drive into a house, rupturing a gas main. We've had cars drive into cars, get totaled. We have a lot of DUIs concentrated on Washington because we're cut through traffic for people coming home from the bars, trying to avoid Buchanan. So cars are on the sidewalk on Washington because of too much traffic, going too fast. I do agree with Preston's statement for strollers and rollers that we have to focus on one side of the street, because any other measure that tries to expand the street, take away a sidewalk, it's very expensive. We're just trying to come up with a solution that keeps people safe without spending a lot of money. So I do think we should focus very much on the south side. The neighborhood has single-handedly pretty much accomplished that. Right now, if you go on the south side, it's mostly clear. Occasionally, you'll see a car blocking. You'll get notes on it. Tends to get moved over. North side, we don't care about so much, right? We want one clear sidewalk where people can push their strollers, kids can get to school, all these folks can use the street safely. So personally, I think that's an important focus. I want to address Councilor Moss's question of, has sidewalk blocking taken priority? I don't really think so. It really is this triumvirate of three things. If you put the cars out into the street, it will slow traffic, but we're getting too much volume, and so we get these mirrors clipped, everyone moves back on the sidewalk, and that encourages people to come through faster again. So I don't want to focus on one thing, but they all are linked, as Chris mentioned earlier. We have seen some positive effects. The stop signs and the crosswalk help some. The orange barriers that were there temporarily also seem to help some. I think the raised crosswalk would help in that same direction with traffic calming. What I've always said to the staff here is do the calming first, and then we'll get the cars back on the street. Everything will work out. But don't do the red striping first, because that'll just make things worse. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Noe Noyola. I'm at 808 Washington Avenue, so we're right on the south side of Washington Avenue, right as it approaches Pierce. So I can tell you firsthand that speeding is an issue. I can tell you firsthand that cars do get clipped, and I agree that people are parking on the sidewalk because of this issue, of getting clipped. It's kind of a never-ending cycle, because then people will park on the sidewalk, and then that allows more traffic to go. I think that if people were to park on the street, narrow and constrict the roadway, there'd be less traffic. A couple of things that I wanted to point out is I think that we already, I think as is mentioned by both the rollers and strollers, Francis mentioned it, that we already do park on the street on the south side of Washington. And we do this because we know that there's a regular parade of people that are walking up from AC Transit and from the bus stops going into the neighborhood. So we do this already, and I think that with a little bit of education, a little bit of guidance about, hey, this is what we're doing now, it's important to encourage people to be able to just, hey, we're not parking on the sidewalk all the way up on the south side. That's the ideal side to not park on. I will say that people will have an extreme difficulty with parking if it's taken away on either side. I think the cutout idea could work. I know it's expensive, but people will have a tough time adjusting to no parking, to red striping anywhere on Washington, particularly on our side, because the driveways are not really accessible. The driveways are very steep, and people can't access those driveways as a parking garage. Just next to us, we have 4 people and 4 or 5 renters that each have a car, and all they have is an alleyway in the back with 1 parking space. So you have to think about how that's going to impact us. In terms of slowing traffic down, a couple of things that we have talked about amongst the community is, one is most of the measures are good. We thought that the intersection at Gateview was a good one. That the idea for that intersection was actually a very good one if we could bring that back, that people could slow down as the way they go up or down the street. The other thing was this notion of a one-way street, or as one of the 2012 assessment, pedestrian safety assessment had as an example of a half barrier, which basically makes it so that you just go down, exit from Washington. I think people would actually be supportive of it. I don't know that, maybe I wasn't there in the past, but recently people have been very supportive of this potential one-waying of the street. So I would encourage the city to be creative in our approach and how we deal with this process.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other public comment? Okay, we'll bring it back to council for comments and decisions. Michael, you want to start?
Yeah, I'm just looking at Google Maps here, and in this section of Washington from Pierce, Gateway, Polk up to Washington Avenue, there's 40 houses about. So my question is, how many parking spaces, including driveways, are there in there? Have we ever counted them?
We have a count.
So the count is 70 to 80? How many do we have?
Where are you?
Right now?
So you're between,
Oh, you have an attachment with the parking spaces that we put as attachment to the staff report.
Michael, are you referring to on-street or off-street?
Off-street, driveways, garages.
Oh, I see. Okay, well, we can count them here.
I park in my driveway. Do people not park? I drove up the street yesterday, and I saw very few cars parked in the driveways, so I'm somewhat skeptical, I guess, just
We
how
have
many?
this, it shows all the driveways and garages.
So, okay, so what's the answer? We have 40 houses. How many driveways do we have? How many off-street parking spaces do we have?
Some of them appear that you cannot, they're not long enough driveways to park in, so I don't.
Some of them are steep, going down, and they're not.
That's true on my block, too.
But not all of them, because
Not all of them.
I walked this the other day pretty intently, and then we have a count. The north side, there are 22 housing units. Now, trust me, these are rough numbers. We're not
Yeah.
civil engineers here. 12 driveways, 28 garages. Now, that's not to say there are 12 driveways that you could put a 2017 car in, but
Right.
just to say it. And on the south side, there's 18 housing units, 23 driveways, 15 garages. And, some of the driveways I know are double, some of the garages are double, not many, but a few. So it gives you kind of an idea.
So, show of hands, how many people routinely park in their driveway here on that street?
My driveway's too short.
Well, I think I have several remaining questions. One is how much this would cost. Which of the options really would the fire department be willing to sign off on? And I'm not sure here, frankly, that we have a public problem in the sense I think all the taxpayers in this town need to pay money to solve this problem, because for a lot of people in this town, this is not a problem. So my questions are, what's a reasonable amount of money to expect the city to chip in to solve this problem, one? And two, is the city legally obligated to provide on-street parking? If everyone in the street has two cars, I don't know, part of me says, that's tough, but are the rest of the taxpayers in this town responsible for finding parking for that many cars? I don't know the answer to these questions.
We don't have a legal obligation to provide on-street parking for anyone. We could, by red zoning, the more red zones you had, the more maneuverability for emergency vehicles. That they kind of go hand in hand. But and in terms of the cost, I'm very reluctant to throw a number out there because because of the geography of this neighborhood, it's just very difficult to know the volumes of materials and the amount of time that it would take to do the construction, and that's what drives costs. We just need to have a little bit more time to do more work, which would be the next phase in order to give you a reasonable cost estimate. If the council wanted us to focus on that as a next step, we could certainly do that and make that the first task of trying to get some reasonably good order of magnitude cost back to you. But we just don't have. I'd be completely making it up. I don't.
Yeah, that's fine. So it sounds like we need to look at that. But what I'm hearing from the neighbors is there's an inherent contradiction that is. And I, by the way, I agree. It would be nice if we had at least one sidewalk on this street fully accessible. And I don't know if we can legally declare the sidewalk on the north side of the street not to be a sidewalk anymore, so we don't have to take it out. We just say, sorry, it looks like a sidewalk, but legally it's not, so people can park on it.
It's difficult for one side of the street, and again, Lieutenant Geisberger can elaborate on this, I'm sure, but the law shouldn't be applied on just one side of the street and not the other side of the street. If two people park at exactly the same time, they both should get parking tickets or not. There's no, it's very arbitrary at that point.
Yeah. Well, the inherent conflict is the more we make room and get cars off the center of the street, the faster the traffic is going to go. So both are objectionable. So people sort of have said, I gather from what they're saying, that they have been willing to put their cars in harm's way to act as traffic barriers until they're not. And this, to me, is, you're not going to solve this unless we widen the streets so people can park or do something, and then restrict, the cut-through traffic, because you can't solve two opposing problems at the same time. And so I mean, I don't know. I don't know what to think.
Yeah, it's kind of coming back to me now, that 2014 meeting. At the time, there was this constant feeling that, we're not going to solve everything. You're just constantly balancing all these different things, and if you fix this, then this isn't going to work so well. So it's a very challenging problem. A couple of comments. Near where I live, Nielsen Street, I think is probably about the same width, and you may know better, but it's a street that's very narrow. People park, there's two-way traffic, and people park on both sides of that street. And occasionally you lose a side view mirror. But I think there might be less of a problem there because, in part, it's not a cut-through. It's not a street that people use to go from Gilman to Marin, particularly. And so a lot of the issues around the parking and the speeding, et cetera, is this whole cut-through problem. So I would have liked to have seen this whole idea of half barriers being used to maybe essentially set up one-way traffic on different places. If you came up to the top of Polk or maybe Cerrito, and you could turn right or left, but you couldn't cut all the way through on Washington on that street. There might be a way for the neighbors to access their homes, but you'd have to go particular ways. And I don't know how that would affect emergency vehicles, but my suspicion is that they could probably still get into where they needed to get in. They would always have to come up Polk Street or Cerrito Street to get to certain blocks. You couldn't take any particular, any route that they wanted to get to a particular location. Again, as Michael put it, without cost estimates, it's really hard to say, yes, we should absolutely do this. I can see some of these things will be cheaper, but if cutouts or bulb outs or anything that involves pouring concrete or redoing the sidewalk so there's one good sidewalk on one side and maybe no sidewalk on the other to allow more parking, we can say, yes, we want this plan, it's the perfect way to go. But if we don't come up with the $3 million it costs to do that for 2 blocks on Washington, it's just not going to happen. So, it does seem to me that, more information about what the costs are pretty important.
Nick?
Sure. So I agree about the half barriers. It's unfortunate that solution has not made it through, because it seems like that eliminates the cut-through problem. And it seems like it might just be the, it's not a frequently used solution, and so people might be wary of it. But I think, I do think it's the way to go if you want to eliminate the cut-through traffic. Now, if we don't do that, I agree that traffic calming is important. It sounds like I haven't heard any dissent about installing speed humps where appropriate. Yeah, I would love to see one at Catherine's Walk. If I think a traffic engineer should decide how many and where they should be, and whether or not we could put one at Catherine's Walk. But if we can put as many as possible, I think a traffic engineer, we should put as many as possible as a traffic calming measure if we don't do half barriers. To me, it's a non-starter to eliminate a sidewalk. We think there's 2 sidewalks now. We should keep 2 sidewalks. I think would be a dangerous precedent to say we'll allow this one sidewalk to be non-passable or eliminate it. I'm not going to be in favor of that. So I do agree with others who said we are trying to balance some things, and I think the residents who spoke on this, it rings true to me that without the traffic calming, you're going to be wanting to get your cars away from the speeders, and you don't want to use your own cars as traffic calming. You need other measures. So I'm hoping we can agree on the speed humps. I'm hoping there's no controversy about the bulb outs or / curb extensions. Those seem like a good idea, and in fact, apparently those have already cut down those already calmed the traffic. So we need to enforce the law. We need to get the cars off the sidewalks. So I am very interested in this question that a couple of people have posed. Are Nielsen and Curtis the same width as Washington? Do we know?
It's a little bit wider.
Yeah, I just looked. Nielsen is 25 feet. This is a 24
22.
foot.
22. Washington's,
This is 22, yeah.
Washington is one of the narrowest streets we have. That's wild. Okay. So I think we have to consider options where parking is eliminated. I don't see this as a street being completely parked up, and I see, as council members have pointed out, that we have garages and we have driveways. Not all of them, all the driveways are usable, but we do have garages for most of the residences, if not all. And interestingly, I heard that we have an alleyway, which apparently is not much usable anymore, but there's an alleyway between...
There are cars parked back there.
Yeah, but there is originally there's an alleyway designed between Solano and Washington, between the houses, because it was imagined, I suppose, that people would park behind their houses. So that is partially used.
Where that is on this map? Where's the alleyway?
Right. I'm getting to that, yeah. So my point was only that you can't you can't see it there. Oh, there we go, yeah. So,
And I think there's a photo of the alleyway on that flash drive I gave you. I may have taken it off, but I took a picture the other day. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Nick.
Inside that alleyway.
yeah, no, it's a good question, actually. I just think people should know that historically.
So in general, you're suggesting going back to the UC transportation, some of the proposed measures there? Is that what you're saying? Because the partial barriers are there.
Probably, but let me get to that in a second. Just kind of, yeah, there's the alleyway.
These are photos I took on Saturday. I'm sorry, I keep interrupting you.
No, that's quite all right. So it only goes, as the gentleman pointed out, I think it only goes back 3 houses, because now, although I do see cars behind a 4th house back there, I'm not sure how they got there, but I think that the rest of the residences up the hill have installed fences in their backyards, and it's no longer, it doesn't go all the way back any longer. Anyway, that was, and it is unfortunate that that was abandoned. So, yeah, I mean, I think that we have to, I think we're going to have to bite the bullet. We're going to have to consider biting the bullet of eliminating parking if that's the best thing to do. And I don't see that being a huge issue. I see there is access on Gateview for parking. There's access along Polk Street for parking. I'm not saying eliminate all parking, but I don't think that eliminating some parking is a bad thing. We do, as city council members, have to weigh the good of the city for everyone. And if we are telling all the taxpayers in Albany that we're going to spend a huge amount of money to construct parking cutouts for the residents of this one block of this one street, or these 2 blocks of this one street, that can be a little hard to justify. So I'll end my comments.
Sorry, I'm
at
not
that
going to
point.
open public comment again.
That's it for now.
May I ask a question? Because I think I didn't understand something about that staff is opposed to having just one side of the street be no parking in the sidewalk. And why again, what is the rationale for not allowing that?
I'm looking at Lieutenant Geisberger to help. This was just in terms of quality of enforcement, I believe, was the principle here that I talked to Chief McQuiston about it.
It becomes really difficult for us if we're enforcing one law in one area and not enforcing it in another area. It doesn't allow us to be judicious in the enforcement.
But, I mean, there are lots of places, like on Pierce Street, people park on the sidewalk on the east side, but they don't, well, right now, it's been a construction zone for a while, but nobody ever parked, to my knowledge, on the west side of Pierce Street on the sidewalk.
They park in the parking strip, and they usually don't park into the sidewalk because there's a parking strip between the curb and the sidewalk, whereas...
But there's no room there at all. I mean, it's the same. You can't walk on that sidewalk when people are parked.
Okay, maybe I'm not sure which part of
Okay,
the street you're talking about.
Maybe I'm also thinking of, other places that I've lived where there were customs about parking and, people just parked in one place and not in another. It seems to me that if it can be signed appropriately, there's no unfairness to ticketing illegal parking on one side of a street and not ticketing similar behavior that is allowed and is clearly and is signed as allowed on the other side of the street. So I personally, I would be inclined to a solution that incorporates that. I would say strongly, I think it is really important to have a sidewalk. One or the other side of the street really needs to be passable, and we're working hard. The city as a whole has taxed itself to fix our sidewalk problems. This is a place where we really must have a sidewalk. For elderly and disabled people, I don't know if if we can allow blue zones on the parking side. I don't know how we would deal with that. I think it's important, though, to make sure that people who are actually elderly and disabled are able to park within a reasonable distance of their homes. But for the rest of us, healthy adults can walk a little ways from a parking spot. I don't think we need to preserve every single parking spot. So in sum, I would support the staff recommendation with the as part of that 35% plan, looking at the possibility of allowing people to park on the sidewalk on the north side, but not on the south side.
If I may, Vice Mayor Nason, are you getting at essentially item D of the Traffic and Safety Commission recommendation?
Yeah, I'm a little, I wasn't entirely sure I understood it. It looked like Traffic and Safety the Traffic and Safety Commission was trying to somewhat soften the impact of the staff recommendation by saying, well, let's work with the community and try different things. But it seemed to me the staff recommendation I thought that was sort of written into item A of the staff recommendation, that let's see.
The recommendation before you this evening from staff really addresses item D with respect to whether we as a city staff can be effective in changing community practices there, kind of informal community practices, something we can take a shot at and try through different mechanisms of signage or just...
So Traffic and Safety and staff all agree on A through C.
Correct.
And the community is okay with A through C. It's D that, it's the enforcement of no parking on both sides of the street. Or on, some people have said they don't think that any parking should be eliminated. I don't think that's realistic in these circumstances. Something's got to give. So my inclination on that D, I guess, is in between the Traffic and Safety and the staff. So it's yet another D. But I think we should, I think that we should start enforcement so that people can get through on the sidewalk on the south side, but consider signage that would be permissive with regard to parking on the sidewalk on the north.
I would like to point out that Kensington doesn't have sidewalks at all on many of its streets, although those are the streets that tend to be level because they follow the contour lines. The steeper streets do tend to be more conventional.
True, but Kensington has larger lots. So it's generally, you can park right in front of your house almost anywhere in Kensington.
Well, not at my in-laws' house, but yeah, I understand your point. Well, here's my question. I have never seen anywhere in Albany any sort of blue zone or handicap zone painted in front of someone's house that gives them sort of an exclusive right to park there because they're disabled or elderly. Is such a thing permitted?
We do have blue zones scattered throughout the city. They're not exclusive, but if a resident comes to us, we have a process that goes through Traffic and Safety Commission, and we do a few of those a year, where if someone can demonstrate that they have a disability and the proper documentation from DMV, and physically it works. There are some cases where it's easy, other cases where it's a little bit more complicated.
But then if someone else who's disabled parks there first, and
that's right. It's first come, first serve.
Question, why, do you recall why the half barriers were eliminated from consideration?
I recall that, I've been watching the meetings too. They would increase vehicle miles travel by looking into alternative routes. That would be at the time we said that it would trigger environmental impacts because of traffic deviation.
So it's based on the principle that the traffic is coming, and if you're just moving the problem into neighboring streets. And yes, they're effective at that one street, but then one block over, you're going to see an increase.
Right, but one block over, we have Solano Avenue, which is an arterial.
I mean, isn't that exactly what we want to do? Is funnel the traffic onto Solano?
Yeah. Yeah, that's the part that I didn't quite get. You're not going to create more traffic. I mean, nobody's going to drive, they might take a different route, but if the route is Solano Avenue, that's better than Washington. If, the problem here is that there's people using it as a pass-through and speeding. If you stop that, they're going to have to go to a more commonly used street that might be watched more closely by the police department. So they're going to slow down. At least, that's the way it seems to me.
It makes sense at the time, and that's what I said. That doesn't mean that things have changed right now. And I remember the community or the whole meeting, the setting of the meeting, not basically supporting the one-way.
Can you put the slide back up that shows the speeds?
The speeds?
But
So after the barricades, the average speed was 17.5. Am I understanding that?
Yeah.
Okay, and I understand that the speed limit is 15.
Yeah.
17.5 does not seem like speeding to me.
No, and I've been saying at the traffic and safety meetings that some large vehicles like pickup trucks, they cannot negotiate that hill at 50 miles per hour. They have to really use more gas in order to be able to go over the hill.
Okay, so would you agree that speeding is not an issue?
If we go by the policy that we currently have, which is basically the 85th percentile, 5 miles over the speed limit, we don't have a consistent speeding at 17.5 at this point.
Okay, but the 85 is 22.
I mean, I'm sorry, yeah, 20. Then we do have, because it's 5 miles over, technically.
I still have a little bit of angst at people driving 22 miles an hour and calling it a speeding problem, but okay, we'll go with that. You wanted to say something, and then I haven't commented yet. Go ahead.
The half barriers, did the half barriers require one-way controls? Or would it be like Adams Street, where it's two-way internally, but then you just can't go through, you have to divert off?
What is similar to the proposal for the Keynes and Adams? It's basically the one-way entry and...
Yeah. Okay, so I just want to make sure we're not calling that one-way because it's not quite one-way, it's something else. But half barriers, diversion off.
It prevents
you can't
the
go
access,
through.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, okay.
It prevents access for people who live on the street as well. They have to follow the same rules.
Yes.
Right, yeah, they might have to have a different pattern after that's implemented.
That also affects everyone on Gateview. They also would have to follow a different pattern.
Yep,
Because
indeed.
that's the only way for them to get onto Gateview, because there's no access on the north end of that street, correct?
I don't think
It's
so.
just dead
Is
ends.
there?
Dead ends, yeah.
So I like the staff recommendations somewhat. I agree that I don't want to have the Community Development Department try to implement a pilot plan for changing parking patterns. I'd rather have the Police Department step in and go ahead and start the enforcement. And I would replace that with the D. Regarding A through C, I still have a problem with the B. In that we can, I'm not necessarily opposed to more study, but if we're going to, it might come out okay, because I see that in the preliminary documents, we cannot build all these cutouts. So it might be okay, but I'm having a problem with spending so much money for the people right there that won't benefit the rest of the city. But we don't know exactly how much yet, so maybe we should do some part of B. Maybe we should do B, but direct staff, to bring it back to council soon, because we don't want to ultimately spend a lot of money on that.
Okay, I need to make a few comments. First of all, we've been having this discussion since 2011. It's 2017. We are not the United States Congress. We need to move this forward. I just thought this all weekend. I was watching the TV and I kept thinking, this sounds like Washington Street. Having said that, I'm not sure, as a council in good conscience, I don't know how we can tell the police department not to enforce state law. That just doesn't make any sense to me. So I think we're going to need to direct them to start a program to implement ticketing for people parked on the sidewalk. And it's obviously not going to happen probably for several months, but we need to start the process. I think the traffic calming, the speed bumps, the raised crosswalk, I think what was done at Gateview, that seemed to work. And I think it seems to me that we're going to need to red curb it to make this all come together. Now, if we want to look at other things like the half barriers, one of my concerns about those is we haven't even figured out if they work on Keynes and Adams. We have our ideas if they do. We haven't heard what public safety thinks about them. So I don't want to say, yeah, that's a great idea. They may not work, and they may not work. We can keep them in our toolbox, but I don't want to say that definitely they're going to work. I agree with what everybody's saying. The cost of this we know it's expensive. We don't know what it is, so we can't really say, yeah, let's go ahead and do it. I think we're better off to start a little bit smaller, just do the traffic calming, do the red curb, enforce the parking, and see where we are, and see how that works. And if we need to do more study, one of the things that I've thought about a couple of times since this first came up, and I agree, this is a small geographic area, it's a lot of money. What if we formed a special district? It's possible to do that. And work with the neighbors, have a special district. You'd be paying a tax on this. But if this is what the neighbors want, and then they can do this. But I'm not sure we want to charge the entire city for a project for really only 2 blocks.
I like where you're going, but I just realized I have a question. Nowhere in the staff recommendation is it recommending moving forward with the bulb outs or the curb extensions. Is that deliberate or?
Well, the residents basically said that they would not support that they would.
I thought that's what they wanted on Gateview.
No, when we were doing the, Cutouts and Associates was doing the 35% plans for bulb outs and mini roundabouts that was recommended at the 2014 City Council. And that's where they came up with the alternative proposal for the parking turnouts. And they said they didn't want any bulb outs, no mini roundabouts anywhere.
Okay, so not even on Gateview?
Nothing.
I'm sorry, I will open this for a minute to public comment.
That was our understanding.
And just raise your hands, isn't Gateview where you want?
Yes, I think that there were people, sorry.
Yeah, come on up, I'm sorry. I'm getting confused, and that can't be good.
I think that the confusion is that when Kittleson Associates came and we did the walking tour, there was pushback for the Cerrito. Is the Cerrito one? The roundabout. First of all, nobody wanted the roundabouts at either location.
Excuse me, where was the other location?
Cerrito and Washington.
And
Gateview and Washington.
Okay.
Those were the 2 proposed roundabouts. A secondary option was to put not roundabouts, but to rather put well, they were a T intersection at Gateview, right?
Right, that's what I'm suggesting too. Like you had those plastic things up there for a long time.
So it was a bulb out, but it also had an intersection. So as you're going up Washington, you would essentially make a sort of a left turn to then turn right on Washington.
It's kind of a triangular shape.
Yes, and so at Cerrito, at Washington, people were, again, very opposed to it. On the other side of the hill where we live, people were, I recall, more in favor of it. And we might be misremembering things, but I can tell you right now from people that are my neighbors, we were in favor of that. In fact, later on, we came back and I said, okay, if the bulb outs are not appropriate, if the T intersection is not appropriate, why don't we just stripe it and make a regular intersection at here, just a stop sign, and a stop sign. And so that would be without any, really, you can do that with striping tape if you want to test it out. I mean, just intersection, and then I'm not sure what happened to that proposal. But I think the neighbors here and here were generally in favor of a stop sign or some kind of intersection there. Here, not so much. I'm sorry, up there, not so much.
Okay, thank you.
I hope that clarifies it, sorry.
If I could speak to that real quickly, that's also, when I first started on this project, that was one of the main proposals I had, was divert traffic towards Gateview, so there's no incentive to go straight through, and it can be done with paint and one of those planter boxes or whatever in the middle of the street there, but just trying to think of low-cost ways to make it, reduce that volume of traffic, reduce the speed, and then we'll be parking in the street again.
One other quick thing, the one issue here was that this parking space was going to get removed for this person. Excuse me. But I think that if you're able to do it with just again, narrowing the width of this crosswalk and just making it so that this comes up and over, you'd be able to retain that one parking space without, really a whole lot of cost. The bulb outs don't need to actually be physical concrete bulb outs, they can simply be paint.
And that was the 2014 idea, to start with striping, and then if it works.
And I would be happy to look at doing that and that's Gateview, right?
That's Gateview.
Right. I'm not quite sure why we wouldn't put in concrete barriers, only because it seemed to work really well when those orange things were there, but I'm also happy to put paint down, whatever, staff thinks.
Well, here's my thinking, and it's evolving as we speak. I think we're closer if we set aside the issue of speeding. We seem uncertain about it ourselves as a council. I think it's a separate problem. We could try to solve the parking problem first and then see if the speeding problem is bad. Now, what the neighbors themselves are doing and what's evolved from the neighbors' perspective is that essentially they are trying to enforce amongst themselves red curbing the south side of the street, so no one parks on the south side of the street. And then
They're not parking on the sidewalk, they're parking.
on the sidewalk, yeah, I'm sorry, yeah, not red curbing, I don't mean that. I mean, they are parking there but not parking on the sidewalk. And they are basically ignoring the sidewalk on the north side of the street, pretending it's not a sidewalk. So part of me goes, well, why don't we run with that and just get rid of the sidewalk on the north side of the street? Legally, the legally cheapest thing that we could possibly do to sort of legalize parking there because it's no longer a sidewalk. And I don't know if that means taking it out or painting it colors or whatever. And then that's sort of what's happening now. And
Well, but it seems to me that we've heard both Jeff and Lieutenant Geisberger say you can't really do that. It makes it really difficult for the police department to tell them it's okay to break the law here, but not okay here.
in Kensington, they don't
But
have
we
sidewalks at all.
We don't live in Kensington. We live in Albany. And
Well, why don't we just take the sidewalk out?
because it's too expensive, I think, is what.
Well, that's what
also
we need to
happened.
find out.
And my point is, let's do something. Let's start. So far, we've spent 6 or 7 years doing nothing. We're still where we were when we started. Let's get this. Let's do this project. Let's do the traffic calming. Let's do the red curb. Let's enforce. I'm not going to bring it open to public comment. Let's enforce the law. Let's see where we are.
You already opened it up to public comment a minute ago.
I did because I had a question. John, do you need to speak to that? Am I pretty much explaining, saying your point, kind of? I don't want to put the police department in a bad position here.
No, I think for us, if there's clear direction on what you want, and if it's considering having one side be signed so it's really clear what is legally expected there, I think we could work with that. But we would need kind of clear direction on that because it does exist in other places that we, as Ms. Nason had said, down on Pierce Street. So we'd need some really clear guidance on what the city is signing off on, is authorizing us to not enforce.
My thinking is the reason we haven't done anything here is maybe because doing nothing so far has been one of the better solutions of all the possible alternatives. And I don't just want to start doing expensive alternatives because they might make it worse. You know, I'm always the skeptic about, well, sometimes, you know, doing nothing and just leaving it is okay. But we need to do something. We need to do something so that you guys can feel okay about that you're doing your job. I respect that.
Thank you.
So I want to talk through the elimination of a sidewalk on the north side, if we're talking about that. I'm certainly still not in favor of that, but if we allow cars to legally park on the north side on the sidewalk, I think as a city, we have to declare that there's no sidewalk. We'd have to put a sign in the sidewalk saying, cross here, sidewalk has ended. Otherwise, if you don't do that, then someone will be walking up or in a wheelchair, and they'll come to that car parked on the sidewalk, and they'll have to go out in the road, and that's not okay. So that's just the implication of allowing people to park on the sidewalk, I feel.
So you're saying you have to close the sidewalk, the entire length of the sidewalk?
Yeah, I mean, you don't necessarily have to get rid of the concrete, but you do have to officially say to people, there is no sidewalk here, you have to cross. If they choose to stay on, then that's another thing.
I think I heard the representative from Strollers and Rollers did suggest they just wanted one clear sidewalk.
I heard that. I disagree, but I just want people to understand the implication of that people would be required to cross the street and then cross back if they needed to get back to that side. So what I'm hearing as consensus is, well, let me poll the council. I think I'm hearing at the ANC we have a consensus on that. I don't think that's controversial, and that's basically putting as many speed humps as we can there. Am I hearing consensus that we want to ask the police department to enforce the regulations at least on the south side? I'm getting nods there, so we've got that. And I think what the other issue that is less clear is which other traffic calming solutions we want to put in place. I think putting in place the bulb outs would be great. And I don't know if there's enough room for mini circles there or not, but perhaps that would be the thing. But since that hasn't really been studied and brought back to us, I'm not sure we can act on that at this time. So I think we're almost ready to move that at least we support A and C and the enforcing the regulations. Is there anything else we'd want to add to that?
Well, you know, I guess where I'm at, again, like Michael, I think my thinking is evolving as we speak. Definitely, I would favor enforcing the law against parking on the sidewalk on the south side particularly, probably long overdue. I think at this point, painting the bulb outs as opposed to pouring concrete might make more sense, because this still seems in a state of flux in terms of what is the best solution here. I would like to continue planning to at least get some more realistic numbers of what all these options are. And that's, again, we're talking about 2 blocks in the city that we might be spending half of our, CIP capital improvements for streets on, if we don't pull back here a little bit. And then, once we get more of that information, come back, and we'll see where we go. I understand about losing parking is difficult in any place around Albany, because for the most part, some people do have driveways or parking garages, but, if your house is like mine, I can't get a vehicle up our driveway. They were for cars built in the 1920s when they were a lot narrower. So I'm not so in favor of painting red curbs, particularly quickly, because where do people park and how far away do you have to park? But it may come to that. And if it does, then we should do it. But let's do stuff incrementally. We have delayed for a long time, and just keep plugging along here and see, what the ramifications are of any particular action we take.
Jeff, what is in the CIP right now for Washington? Are there speed humps in Catherine's Walk? Is that already in the CIP?
In the new one that you'll be taking action on in a few months, I believe they're in there.
Yeah. Yeah. We haven't improved it yet, but I did see that it was tentatively put in there. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm kind of intrigued by your idea of closing off the entire sidewalk. So it's not just it's okay and people can wander back and forth. And I'm not quite sure what that would look like, but I think to somehow make it clear that that is no longer a sidewalk from one end of the street to the other. And I'm sure there's signage we could use that would do that. That would sort of solve that problem, I think. So people were not walking along, running into a car on the sidewalk, having to cross the street in a dangerous place, or coming across. I think that might be a good alternative.
I'm having a little bit of trouble having it be called my idea because I don't really want to do it. But what I'm saying is that legally, I think in liability-wise, if we allow people to park and block the sidewalk, we have to say there is no sidewalk. I don't see how we could not say that.
So what about this? Supposing we were to do that, we were to close off the north side sidewalk. We direct staff to create a program for enforcement, and we paint the bulb outs at Gateview. Is that what I'm hearing is what
Make
people...
a suggestion. If you look at the Calusa Circle, they did a combination of just painting sort of yellow stripes to keep the traffic to the outside of the circle, and they put in some kind of little bumps. You don't. It's not like concrete barriers or just paint. There's middle ground in there. Putting little speed bumps and stuff in there.
Okay. Well, perhaps we could leave that level of detail to staff.
But how about the bulb out at the other intersection?
At Cerrito?
Cerrito, yeah. What I heard is that...
For tonight, why don't we leave that be? It doesn't seem like that's a real interest of the residents.
It wasn't the interest of residents, but I think those were the only ones who were putting up an objection. I think it's the right thing to do at that intersection. It would be a very similar treatment to what you're doing at Gateview. You're basically squaring off the intersection so you don't have a large space for cars to do wide turns on.
Aleda, do you have a thought about that?
Well, we put a couple of plants there to test the bulb out at that part of the street, but we have also residents complaints about losing parking because it would be right in front of a residential street parking. So again, it was not supported by the residents.
What about, as was suggested, the stop signs three stop signs at the intersection of Gateview and Washington? Is that something we want to consider? Seems like the neighbors originally had liked that idea. Certainly as traffic calming.
Well, now I'm kind of seeing where the mayor is going. Maybe it's non-controversial, sounds like, to do that one bulb out. The rest, maybe we should direct staff to do further study on, and maybe, and so leave it at there. That's our incremental step.
Okay, wait, just, can you show me Cerrito? Whoa, don't go so fast. Can you show me Cerrito on that map? Okay. Right. When I was there on Saturday, I was thinking that you could, I don't think I can even describe it, sort of close, you can make that right turn right now, but fill that part in so that you had to go like around a barrier to turn right. Would that help at all?
Well,
no, we can't street design.
You want to talk about, because we do have 35% plans for the roundabouts and also bulb outs. So do you want to talk about that? We did something similar.
I think what you're talking about is if you are going on Cerrito South, I'll just point. Is there any way to scroll or move this down?
That's it.
Okay.
No.
Then
There we go.
is it this right turn, basically there?
Actually, from Washington turning right onto Cerrito.
That one?
If you blocked it so you had to go, there's kind of an island there now, isn't there?
Yes.
If you blocked it between that island and the curb, so you had to go around the island, I'm not sure that would help, but it seemed like it might.
It's great, it's almost 180 degrees now. Does anybody ever really make that turn?
Yes. Yes, but it's not the issue. The
Okay.
issue is Washington to Washington.
Okay, so let's take that off the table for a minute. Okay.
All right, so I
think we're close, Nick.
Yeah, I think where you were going was
I don't know if everybody else is
was
on
good. Then just do the non-controversial one for now.
Okay, so
And then the only thing I would add, I had the same list as you just stated. The only thing I would add is that we direct staff to use their discretion as to what further study and planning to do at this point.
well, I think we need to try it and see what happens before we go off and spend more money. So I think if we do close the sidewalk, Jeff, is that feasible, to close the sidewalk? It's some way to say that,
We haven't talked about that, but I think we could probably figure out a way to do that. I think the council's right that there should be some signage that makes it really clear, and we should go out there and walk it and just think through the details of it.
Sidewalk get closed in construction zone all the time.
Right. That's right. And just making sure that we're not creating a particular hazard right where we close it, because people will presumably be crossing the street there at that point to get to the other side.
A question, I'm not sure it would be particularly effective, but has anyone ever thought about putting a sign at, say, Washington and Adams as you go up the hill saying residential traffic only? Something
they're
that,
public streets.
it's a public street, but, something that somehow, maybe that isn't the wording, but something that somehow discouraged cut-through traffic.
There are street signs where it says 17% slope, large trucks not recommended. You see signs like that all the time.
Yeah.
It's worth a try.
But let's not micromanage the project any more than I already have.
It was
a good idea.
Just a question.
Okay, so where are we? We've got closing, but I did have a thought about closing the sidewalk. What happens to the people that live there? Do they have?
They have to cross the street?
They have to cross the street.
They have to cross the, or they have to get in their car and drive away, I guess. Okay, so consider closing the sidewalk, developing a program to enforce no parking on the sidewalk on the south side. And with a cost-effective traffic calming at Gateview, so leaving it to staff discretion if we could put some kind of little bump things in or paint or whatever, and the speed humps and the raised crosswalk at Catherine's Walk.
Yeah, that would be A and C, items A and C, if that's okay. You want me to read those off? Item,
What Peggy said is clear. I don't know why we need to.
Yeah.
no,
I do need some clarification. Are you directing us to red zone on the south side?
No.
No.
So
Not at
there's
this point.
vehicles parked on the south side in the roadway,
Yes.
It's just not on the sidewalk.
not on
Not on the
the
sidewalk, yeah.
And so the vehicle, so that's narrow, that's making the narrowness of the roadway, that's narrowing the space left for vehicles in the roadway, which makes emergency traffic more difficult.
Well, I was going to make sure that you check in, Lieutenant Boydo? Could you give us just a real quick, will that work for you? And can you come up to the mic?
Yeah.
And I know I'm putting you on the spot, you haven't really studied this, but
It's okay. I remember, this is all jogging memories back in 2012 and 14 and all that. The street is already challenging enough because it's kind of so if there was a way to maybe regulate or kind of control it a little bit so it's consistent, that helps us, but it's so narrow. I mean, I'm surprised we haven't taken mirrors off ourselves, honestly. So with all these things, we'll be happy to obviously look and go up with the engines and check and drive through and the aerial to make sure this will work for us. But it's just tight. It's a very, as everybody's all agreed, it's a very tight, tough area for us to navigate.
And it should be red anywhere that it's too tight.
and part of it already is.
Are you saying that this would make, if cars park out on the street on the south side, that this would make things worse than they are now? If cars park on the sidewalk on the north side?
Right, unless cars park further up onto the sidewalk on the north side, which I don't know if people would do or not, you're only, the net effect is the vehicle that's parked on the south side is further into the roadway. And if the car on the north side is the same place where they always park, the net space of pavement left in the middle of the road is going to be 2 or 3 feet narrower, which is an issue. And I think one of the things that Captain Boydo shared some time ago with us is that it's not just maneuvering the vehicle down the street, but when they stop in front of someone's home, they have to be able to open the doors, and they have steps that come out of the apparatus so that they can get out of the cab. And they need room to do that and to open their cabinets and so forth. So I appreciate the council's sensitivity to emergency response, and I think that's something that we would want to study. And I kind of feel like at this point, maybe we should take your comments, do a quick study, see what we can do to get some decent, it wouldn't be very good, but some decent order of magnitude cost for the parking cutout that would help inform you, and maybe bring this back sometime soon. I hate to do that, but I feel like that we might be at the point, getting close to that point where you need us to do a little bit more work before you make a decision.
How soon is sometimes soon? I do. I really feel like we've spent 6 years and we're still where we were 6 years ago.
Yeah. I would have to look with Nicole at our queue of things that are coming to you, I'm thinking in a few council, 1 or 2 council or 3 council meetings, not months or years, but we do need a little bit of time to do the work and need to think about what else we have planned coming towards you in the next couple of months.
Well, here, let's work on the showstopper first. The showstopper is that if a fire truck, assuming we only allow on-sidewalk parking on the north side and street parking on the south side, which, as you pointed out, narrows their street effectively by 2 or 3 feet. You figure out what that width is, and somebody extends the step on the fire trucks, measures that width, and if the fire truck with its steps extended is wider than what the street would be, we're done. We don't have to do anything else. Then we're back to square one.
Right. Could you have any guesses to that?
I do have.
Honestly, I would doubt, depending on,
I'm sorry, you would doubt what?
depending on where we're able to stop. If we're able to stop where maybe there's a driveway kind of opening, we could probably make it work along the street. But if it's for some particular reason we have to stop at a exact location, there will be times where we just can't open our doors and the steps won't come down. But I'm working tomorrow too, so I can go up there tomorrow with the engine and check the street at different times just to see where we're at, and I can get back with Jeff and Aleda. I don't know if you have time or not, but we can get on it.
I think that'd be great. Maybe we could take some photographs from members of the public and council we could bring back.
Oh, I thought we were so close. So one more question.
Just to just like a little bit, in preliminary studies of these sidewalk parking, we think that it's going to, the vehicle, if they park completely over the sidewalk, we overlap about 3 feet on the street, which, and if we allowed parking on the other side of the street, then we would leave us about 12 feet of width. And from 2014 and 15, we were told that the fire department needs 14 feet to deploy the ladder.
That doesn't sound like a lot. And also sounds like if you depend on cars parking on the sidewalk, there's total variability there. You can't really have, you can't know what's going to happen. And we can't enforce, I mean, yeah, that's good. It sounds like a bit like chaos. So was it ever proposed that we allow parking on the street, off the sidewalk, on one side and not the other?
It's a lot like red curbing.
Yes, you would have to red curb.
Yeah,
one
and
side.
that's.
Well, that's
Just
are in the plan for certain.
Just on one side, though. I mean, the plans I've seen have red curbs on both sides.
Well,
Have we ever done?
They're alternating, though.
They're alternating.
Oh, is that how it works?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
And there are some areas right now that are red curbed on both sides.
Yeah, the hill is practically red curve on both sides at this point.
Well, then, we were close there, Nick. We had a good idea.
We're close there, but now that I heard the concerns about the emergency vehicles, I don't see how we can not do this red curbing.
I don't either.
Yeah.
No.
Would you like to make a motion?
Is it in the staff recommendations?
Okay, go.
We don't have a staff recommendation for this, so I would need a moment to figure out what the motion is.
Are we, given it's taken us,
Made comments before about how unpopular that is, and I don't feel like you're hearing that.
Well,
I mean, it's really serious to all of us. Like, you can imagine having your street red curved and not being able to have parties, not being able to have people visit you at any place to park. We already are very tight in our neighborhoods. People are angry at each other because somebody parks in front of their house so that they can't get out of their car and have their groceries immediately there. And it is already affecting us, not having enough parking as it is. Please don't do that to our neighborhood. We've been working pretty hard trying to find some other.
you have, and we're not saying this is the absolute end, but we do need to do something now, and we'll see how this works.
We do need to do something now.
Excuse me. We had public comment, and we do hear you. We may not agree with you, but we do hear you.
well, if we've been waiting this many years, can we wait a week longer and just have the fire department drive up there with a truck one more time? I mean, if your choice is easy street parking, but having your house burned down because we can't get a fire truck in there, what kind of choice is that?
Well, what would the fire truck be studying exactly? At this point?
What I would like the fire truck to go up there, do some measurements.
Test my hypothesis. Can they do it in the driveways or not?
Ex-
I think they can.
Excuse me, we're not having public comment right now.
Well, we had an offer from our fire department. I don't think it's going to kill us to wait a week. Let's have them go up there tomorrow, take some pictures so we have a better sense of how things really look. We can wait 2 days.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, I think if you investigated where the driveways are and got some sense, it's very hard for me to imagine that you're always going to have to park in an exact spot that you couldn't move 3 feet, forward or 3 feet back and end up with driveways to give you the room that you needed to drop the stairs on either side of the truck. It's, I think it's worth looking at.
Yeah, no, we'll take care of it tomorrow. We'll check all the spots. We'll take pictures and see what it's like. We'll try a couple different times during the day to see if there's a difference. Afternoon, morning, evening, that kind of thing.
If it turns out that for the most part that would work, and maybe there are a couple spots where we'll have to put red paint on the curb, but there's a difference between doing that and applying this plan where we're doing long stretches of red here and long stretches of red there. Maybe that's a bridge too far.
Yeah.
Okay, Nicole, do we have time on our next agenda to bring this back, or do we?
That's what we're just thinking through, and I don't have the agenda listing in front of me. Of course, we can juggle that depending on the priorities of the council. I was suggesting to Jeff that we indicate that we would return with this item in February to give us the flexibility of the first or second meeting, because as we go out on the street, it sounds like a simple analysis, but that may
never is.
Ask other questions, and we want to make sure that the council has the entire perspective when this returns to you.
Okay.
So would you prefer a motion at this point, or would you just have you gotten the direction?
I think we're continuing the item
Okay.
until a date uncertain in February, one of your two council meetings, with direction to staff to do some additional analysis, see if we can fine-tune the recommendations a bit further.
Could I
would
suggest, go ahead.
I just would suggest also to the neighbors, to the extent you can do this without interfering with the fire department, look out your windows, watch from the sidewalk, and take pictures yourself. Make sure you're cool with, and so that you agree with what the fire department says. Be there too.
That as you're looking at this again, that there be a consideration of the possibility of assuring an open sidewalk on the south side, even if that means some red curbing has to go in, and even if it means enforcing in some places that are not red curbed, if someone is parked on the sidewalk, they can get a ticket, even if it's okay on the other side, and that we look at whether that's something, closing the sidewalk, as somebody put it, is a possibility.
Okay, is everybody okay with continuing it?
Is everyone equally unhappy here?
If staff thinks they have as clear directions as they can at this point, then yeah.
Okay, great.
We're absorbing what you've given us this evening, and we'll get more information from the fire department, and I, in my mind, have some graphic images that I'd like to maybe pull together that would help perhaps in your next discussion of some of the different scenarios you've talked about tonight.
Okay, great.
So I think we can help you hopefully corral this issue a little bit with a little bit more time, so I appreciate the continuance.
And thanks to the fire department for willing to help out.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and thank you all for coming. We are hearing you. We're trying to make this work for everybody. So, we're trying to work through it for you. Okay, and with that, we have no new business, other business, announcements of events, future agenda items.
Announcement that there is the All Debates Forum on February 3rd at 11 a.m. at the Ed Roberts campus at the Ashby BART station.
And the Civics Academy, that the signups, have they started yet, or? Okay, and then when do signups cut off?
March 22nd.
March 22nd. Thank you.
And although I thought Nick would make this announcement, a week from tonight, there'll be a...
Oh,
Right.
thank you. Yeah, I need to plug my own stuff more. Yes, so a week from tonight in the Albany High School Little Theater will be an Assembly District 15 Candidates Forum. All 9 candidates will be there to take questions from the Albany Democratic Club as well as from the audience. So be there, be square.
Okay, and with that, we are adjourned. Thank you.